Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Cristie Schoen. Cristie Schoen was born on September 3, 1976, in Madrid, Spain, to American parents who served in the United States military. Due to her father's military career, Cristie spent her childhood moving between different locations in Europe. Her family eventually settled back in the United States. Cristie began school in New Orleans, Louisiana, but her education was moved around frequently due to her father's military career. She briefly attended schools in Texas and Illinois before moving to Latin America, where she lived for several years. Such a nomadic lifestyle had its benefits, as Cristie spoke multiple languages from a young age and had the opportunity to experience the cultures and traditions of other countries. However, during her teenage years, she faced challenges integrating into new groups and making friends in new places. This constant change helped her develop exceptional communication skills. As a result, she easily made friends with people from different backgrounds and gained a reputation as a kind, outgoing, and charming young woman. Cristie was also an active and healthy person, participating in various sports from a young age, such as gymnastics, swimming, and kickboxing. After graduating, her family eventually settled in Beloit, Mississippi, where her father had retired from the military. This stability helped Cristie form lasting friendships and discover new interests, especially cooking. Cristie discovered a passion for cooking and spent a lot of time experimenting in the kitchen, creating dishes that were praised by everyone. Her passion for cooking motivated her to pursue further training, and she completed culinary courses to hone her skills. Cristie's parents initially envisioned her becoming a professional chef, but she surprised them by showing a natural talent for acting. With a strong passion for the arts, she enrolled in an acting academy and moved to Los Angeles to pursue her dream. Upon arriving in Los Angeles, Cristie discovered the many opportunities that were waiting for her. She used her intelligence and determination to establish herself in the industry. Her early experiences included appearing in commercials, performing on stage, and working as an extra or stunt double in major Hollywood productions. One of her first notable roles was a small role in the Terminator series, which required her to perform physically demanding stunts. Despite graduating from the Acting Academy in 2000, Cristie has yet to secure any major or memorable roles. Despite her striking looks and obvious talent, she later decided to focus on her cooking and athletic skills. Cristie gained widespread recognition after appearing on several popular culinary television shows. Her appearance on the next Food Network star placed her in the finals, but unfortunately, she did not win due to mixed reviews from the judges for her unique dishes. Despite this, Cristie gained attention and built a significant following on social media, where thousands of people follow her life and culinary creations. She actively promotes healthy living, giving advice on proper nutrition and even developing her own exercise routines to maintain good fitness. About a year later, Cristie launched a catering company that caters to events and sells prepared food products. What sets her business apart is her focus on healthy eating, with menus featuring her own unique recipes. Cristie soon considered taking her business to the next level by starting a farm that grew healthy, sustainable produce. This would allow her to expand her catering services and continue her commitment to healthy eating. Additionally, she began teaching online nutrition courses and pursuing other projects in the field. Cristie met Joseph Timothy Codd, also known as JT, in 2012 at a studio in Los Angeles. Joseph was a casting director working on a popular cooking show that Cristie wanted to be on. They connected immediately. At the time, Joseph was nearly 7 years older than Cristie, had been married before, and was in the process of getting divorced. He was captivated by the attractive blonde's beauty and charisma, and he began pursuing her romantically. Cristie returned his interest, and they soon began a relationship. As their relationship grew, Joseph shared and supported his partner's ideas, and together they began working on their own farm project. Soon after, the couple decided to leave Los Angeles and move from Sun, California to North Carolina. To fund their new venture, they sold Cristie's catering business, and Joseph sold his Hollywood home, using the proceeds to buy a large lot in Lear. Their new property included a spacious home and nearly an acre of land to make their dream a reality. Joseph continued his work with television channels, but switched to working remotely, while Cristie focused on growing her blog about healthy living and nutrition. The couple had a very harmonious and loving relationship. After deciding to take their love to the next level, they got married in August 2014 in a lavish ceremony attended by hundreds of guests, including family members, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and fans. The couple was extremely happy and had big plans for their future. Just 3 months after their wedding, Cristie became pregnant, and the couple was overjoyed and happy. During an ultrasound scan after the new year, the doctor confirmed that they were having a baby girl. Shortly after, Cristie shared the news with her mother over the phone, mentioning that they had chosen the name Skylar for their child. The pregnancy went smoothly and everything seemed to be falling into place. When Cristie was 5 months pregnant, troubling events began to occur. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Cristie had been keeping her distant parents updated on her well-being through frequent phone calls, sometimes as long as an hour. However, on March 13, 2015, Cristie's mother was unable to reach her daughter, but she initially didn't think much of it. The next day, Cristie's mother tried to contact her and her husband, Joseph, again, but her calls went unanswered. Her attempts to reach her son-in-law were also unsuccessful. When both phones were turned off on March 15, Cristie's mother became increasingly concerned. Since Cristie and Joseph's families lived far away, they could not easily verify that everything was okay at their children's home. Therefore, Cristie's mother decided to contact Cecily, a trusted friend of her daughter who lived in the area, to have her check the house. When she arrived at Cristie's house, the friend noticed that both husband and wife's cars were parked outside, but the front door was locked. Despite knocking and shouting, there was no response. This, combined with the couple's phone being unreachable for 3 days, raised significant suspicion. Cecily saw the couple's dogs locked inside the house through a window, which was unusual as they never left them alone. Cecily walked around the house and discovered that the back door lock had been broken, indicating a possible break-in. She immediately called Cristie's mother, who then contacted the police. Upon arrival, footage confirmed that the back door had been broken into and found a disturbance inside, indicating someone had been searching for something. Several valuables had been stolen, including a jewelry box belonging to the homeowner and items from a safe that had been broken into in the couple's bedroom. However, there were no signs of a struggle or evidence that the couple had been held or taken by force. The perpetrators had acted very discreetly, leaving no fingerprints or DNA. While relatives held out hope that Joseph, 45, and his wife, Cristie, 38, who was 8 months pregnant, were still alive, seasoned police officers were more pessimistic. In the early days of the investigation, police were unable to find any significant evidence or clues. The missing couple, Cristie and Joseph, had no enemies or conflicts with anyone else, making it a challenge to reconstruct what happened. The only clue they found was the couple's phones, which had been left at home and last used on March 12. Although the devices ran out of battery the next day, they still had records of incoming calls. Police decided to interview the couple's neighbors to see if anyone had noticed anything unusual recently. That's when an interesting detail emerged. A neighbor who lived across the street reported seeing another local resident, later identified as Robert Jason Owens, 36, throw a large bundle into a dumpster near the couple's home on the morning of March 15. The neighbor initially thought little of it, but after learning about the couple's disappearance, he decided to share the information with the police. However, by the time the police received the information, the trash had already been taken to the landfill. Before searching the landfill, the police wanted to speak with Robert. After investigating the information, the police learned that he lived in the same neighborhood, knew the couple, and was even considered a close friend of the family. Robert was a handyman who had helped Cristie and Joseph when they first moved into their new home. At first, there was nothing suspicious about Robert's relationship with the couple. However, upon further investigation, other locals described Robert as a strange and unpredictable person, raising suspicions about his possible involvement in the couple's disappearance. Robert was called to the police station on March 16 for questioning about the missing couple. Initially, he denied any involvement in the couple's disappearance and claimed to know nothing about the bundle in question. Since he did not confess to anything and there was no solid evidence, there was not enough to charge him. Things changed that evening when police found a large bundle of belongings in a landfill. Inside were items from the missing couple's home. Police also found Robert's fingerprints and DNA on some of the couple's partially burned clothing. A blood-stained blanket and bedsheets from their home were also found in the bundle. This evidence confirmed police suspicions that Cristie and Joseph were no longer alive. Those suspicions were dispelled when police searched Robert's home and found charred human remains in his wood stove. This discovery led to Robert being named a suspect in Cristie and Joseph's deaths. Despite Robert's initial denials and inconsistent statements, he eventually confessed to the crime after hours of questioning. However, he claimed that the incident was accidental. According to Robert, on the evening of March 12, he visited Cristie and Joseph's home after getting stuck in the mud while trying to avoid hitting a dog with his car. He asked them to help push the car out, and Cristie and Joseph agreed. While they were pushing the car, Robert claimed that he accidentally pressed the gas pedal instead of the brake pedal, causing the car to hit and run over the couple. Terrified by what he had done, Robert chose not to report the incident to the police, fearing that he would be charged with intentionally taking their lives. Instead, he attempted to cover up the crime. Robert claimed that he returned to Cristie's home through the back door and took a blanket from the bedroom. Using these blankets, he wrapped the bodies of his victims, whom he was not sure were actually dead, and placed them in the back of his pickup truck. He then drove the bodies back to his home, where he dismembered them with a saw and a hatchet in the bathroom. To dispose of the remains, Robert burned the body parts piece by piece on his stove. However, instead of burning the victims' blood-soaked clothing and personal belongings, he packed them into a garbage bag and threw them in the trash, assuming they would end up in a landfill and never be found. After disposing of the bodies, Robert broke into Cristie's home himself, stealing money and valuables to create the appearance of a burglary. Robert's brutal treatment of the victims' bodies, as well as his unsettling calmness in describing the incident, shocked even experienced police officers. Police discovered a saw and an axe at his home, both covered in blood, skin, and bone fragments from the deceased. What was particularly shocking was that Robert made no attempt to clean or conceal the tools of his crime, believing that he had nothing to do with the crime scene, having avoided leaving any evidence at the victim's home. A forensic analysis confirmed that bone fragments discovered in Robert's kitchen matched the DNA of the missing couple, prompting law enforcement to investigate further into the suspect's past. Robert Owens, a loner, was unmarried and had no children. He also kept his distance from his relatives. In 2000, Robert moved out of his previous home in Asheville, North Carolina, to settle on a newly purchased lot in Lewiston, where he later built a house. As police investigated further, they found a connection between Robert and an unsolved crime that had occurred 15 years earlier in Asheville. The case involved the unexplained disappearance of Zeb Wayne Quinn, an 18-year-old man who had been Robert's childhood friend. At the time of his disappearance, Zeb was a military trainee and a part-time employee at Walmart, living near Robert. On January 2, 2000, Zeb met Robert after his shift ended, and they planned to drive to Leicester to buy a new car. However, Zeb never returned home. A few days later, his Mazda protege was discovered in another part of town, parked with the headlights on. A heart was drawn on the window in red lipstick. Although the car was recovered, Zeb was never found, and the car was also damaged and scratched with paint marks from another car. The last person to see Zeb was Robert, and his car also showed signs of damage. Notably, the scratches on Robert's car contained paint particles from Zeb's car. Robert told a strange and unbelievable story. As soon as they walked towards Leicester, Zeb blinked at Robert to stop. Zeb said he had received a message on his pager and needed to use a public phone urgently. He asked Robert to wait and drove to the nearest gas station but returned after 10 minutes. Zeb appeared panicked, said their plans had changed, and drove off in an unknown direction, in the process crashing into Robert's car. It was also discovered that Zeb, who was romantically involved with a woman named Misty Taylor, whose ex-boyfriend, Wesley Smith, had threatened Zeb with harm if he did not stop seeing Misty Taylor. Wesley and Robert were questioned in the case, but due to lack of evidence, all three were released. Additionally, Misty and Wesley had alibis, while Robert did not. After investigation, a large sum of money and a pager were missing from Zeb's car. Police suspected the pager might be a false lead, and there was never any evidence that the message was sent. A phone call was made to Walmart the day after Zeb went missing from the Volvo plant where Robert worked, saying that Zeb would be out sick for a few days. However, the voice on the phone sounded strange to Zeb's coworkers. Despite further investigation, no new evidence or witnesses were found, leaving the case unsolved and Zeb listed as missing. 15 years later, Robert was again questioned as a suspect in Zeb's disappearance. The Zeb Wayne Quinn case was reopened in June 2015, but hopes of finding new information were low. When questioned again, Robert repeated the story he told in 2000, without providing any new clues. However, the police decided to conduct a thorough search of his property. The investigation led them to an unexpected discovery: a walled-off cavity inside a detached concrete slab at Robert's home. Inside, they found small, heavily charred human bone fragments, but unfortunately the remains were too damaged for DNA analysis to definitively determine whether they belonged to the missing Zeb. Interviews with a neighbor revealed new information that helped shed some light on the situation. An elderly man who lived nearby recalled a strange incident that occurred in January 2000. At the time, Robert had just purchased the land and was starting to build his house. One evening, Robert lit a fire that emitted a strong odor. The smell was so nauseating that it blew toward the neighbor, making him nearly sick. The neighbor even approached Robert to express his concerns about the smell. Shortly after the incident, the fire pit was filled with concrete, which seemed unusual. Robert mentioned that he had plans to build a small fountain at that location, but he never carried out the plan. The neighbor forgot about the incident until 15 years later, when the police came to the house. Eventually, Robert confessed to participating in a crime and told a new story. According to Robert, his uncle, Walter Owens, was the one who killed Zeb. Walter had been hired by Wesley Smith. Wesley apparently still had feelings for Misty, Zeb's girlfriend, and wanted to get rid of Zeb. Robert claimed that he was unaware of his uncle's plans and was only told to take Zeb to a secluded location. When they reached a wooded area, Robert's uncle ordered them to stop the car and forced Zeb to do so. When Zeb got out of the car, Walter shot and killed him quietly. After the murder, Walter instructed Robert to help him cut up Zeb's body, package it, and then burn it in Robert's yard that night. The body was then encased in concrete. Walter Owens could not be questioned, as he had died several years before Robert's chilling confession. Furthermore, no evidence was found at the crime scene, and Robert's story was not confirmed. Robert initially faced serious charges, including first-degree murder in the deaths of Joseph Timothy Codd and his wife Cristie Schoen, fetal homicide, dismemberment, concealment of evidence, burglary, and robbery. These charges could have resulted in the death penalty. However, it was discovered that Robert had a long history of struggling with depression and psychosis, for which he was taking strong medication. His attorney used this information as the basis for his defense. In 2017, Robert Jason Owens accepted a plea deal, admitting to murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. As a result, he was convicted of second-degree manslaughter, dismemberment and burning of a body, burglary, and robbery. In total, he was sentenced to 59 years in prison. In 2022, Robert entered into another plea deal with the police, this time in connection with the case of Zeb Wayne Quinn. However, he only admitted to complicity in the murder and assisting in concealing evidence of the crime. He was sentenced to an additional 12 years in prison, on top of his existing 59-year sentence. During his sentencing hearing, Robert addressed the court and begged forgiveness from the victims' families. Despite his earlier admissions, Robert maintained that the killings were accidental rather than intentional. He blamed his mental health and the strong medication he was taking for impairing his judgment. The victims' families were not convinced by his claims of inadvertence. They refused to accept that the killings were accidental and instead believed that Robert had acted deliberately and with selfish motives. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Isla Reynolds. Isla Reynolds was born on April 4, 2010 in Waterville, Maine, USA. She is a beautiful girl with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a cute smile. Her parents, Cristie Reynolds and Justin DiPietro, had a brief relationship in the summer of 2009, which resulted in Cristie becoming pregnant. However, Justin suspected that he was not the father of the child. When Cristie gave birth to Isla, Justin took a paternity test in July 2010, which confirmed that Isla was his daughter. As a result, he was ordered by Child Protective Services to pay child support in December of that year. Cristie and Justin agreed that Isla would be raised by Cristie. Cristie and her daughter live in Portland. It wasn't until mid-2011, after Isla's first birthday, that Justin began visiting her. He lived an hour and a half away, and Justin would visit Isla during the day. Cristie and Justin agreed that Justin could take Isla out, but not stay overnight. After a while, Cristie got a new boyfriend, Raymond. Cristie became pregnant, and in 2011, the family welcomed a new member. Cristie would raise both children. Everything changed on October 13, 2011, when Cristie met with Child Protective Services. The details of the complaint that led to the meeting remain unclear, but it is known that Cristie had a substance abuse problem. That day, officials gave Cristie a choice. Cristie would go to rehab, or she would lose custody of the children. Cristie immediately entered a 10-day rehab program and left her daughter with her mother and sister. Cristie was determined not to lose custody. By October 2011, Justin had seen Isla about 5 to 10 times. However, just 4 days after Cristie began rehab, on October 17th, Justin and his family decided they wanted to take custody of Isla. Justin's mother, Phoebe DiPietro, contacted Child Protective Services and was approved to adopt Isla. Child Protective Services quickly notified Cristie's relatives of their decision. After being granted permission, Justin and his family picked up Isla but did not know her exact address. Child protective officials provided the location through police officer Charles Weaver, who accompanied Justin and Justin's mother Phoebe to the home of Isla's aunt, Jessica. Justin's mother Phoebe waited in the car while Justin and the police entered the house to pick up Isla. A tense situation occurred. Isla's mother Jessica begged the police not to take Isla away and warned that she would not hand over the child to anyone. The police observed that Isla was very happy, constantly laughing and playing. However, When Justin appeared, Isla began to cry and tried to move away from him. Despite this, the police officer still handed the child over to Justin. When Isla was handed over to Justin, she struggled and screamed. She even tried to bite the officer. Child Protective Services Supervisor Charles was told by the officer that Isla hated her father and that they could not give the child to Justin. But Charles said that it was not his decision. He was just there to carry out child services orders. For Justin to have formal custody of Isla, he would have to get the consent of Isla's mother, Cristie, or go through a court process to have the child approved by a judge. In this case, there was no agreement or court process. Instead, the Child Protective Services supervisor's decision to place the child was valid. Child Protective Services Supervisor Charles gave custody of Isla to Justin. He then took Isla to the house in Waterville where he lived with his 47-year-old mother, Phoebe, his 24-year-old sister, Alicia, and Elisha's daughter, Gabriella. Justin, 25, lived in a large room in the partially finished basement, while the rest of the family lived upstairs. During this time, Cristie called Justin every day to talk to Isla. On October 20, 2011, while Cristie was in treatment, a meeting was held to discuss Isla's case. Attendees included Child Protective Services, 2 doctors, Cristie and her sister Jessica, and their attorneys. Justin also attended the meeting by phone. The meeting resulted in an agreement that Isla would be returned to her mother on October 22, 2011, immediately after Cristie completed her drug treatment program. In addition, Justin agreed to take Isla to the treatment center on the 21st to visit her mother. Initially, things went well for Cristie. However, the decision was reversed. In her desperation to get her daughter back, Cristie called Child Protective Services several times to ask them to help enforce the agreement. Unable to reach them, Cristie attempted to negotiate with Justin to reach a temporary agreement. Under the agreement, Justin would continue to care for Isla and Cristie would be allowed regular visits. On November 12, 2011, Justin took Isla to the emergency room. After a doctor examined her, they determined that Isla had a fractured elbow. According to Justin, the accident occurred the night before, November 11th. It was raining at the time and Justin believed that he had slipped and fallen on her while holding her on the porch. Initially, Justin thought that she was not seriously injured because although she was crying, she seemed fine. However, it was not until the next morning that Justin noticed that Isla had injured her hand, so he took her to the hospital. By the following Monday, the orthopedist concluded that surgery was not necessary and that Isla's injury would heal on its own. A week later, on November 26, during Isla's 3rd visit, the specialist said that Isla's condition was improving and that she was slowly recovering. Cristie was at the hospital to monitor her daughter's health. Never thought that this would be the last time Cristie would hold her daughter in her arms. From that moment on, things went from bad to worse. Tired of fighting over custody, visitation rights, and even the right to talk to her on the phone, Cristie filed a lawsuit to gain custody of her daughter. On December 15, 2011, Cristie filed a lawsuit for custody of Isla. Custody of Isla was awarded to her just 2 days later on Saturday, December 17. Justin called the police in the morning to report Isla missing from his mother's house, where he was staying with his girlfriend Courtney Roberts and sister Alicia. Justin assured them that the police had put Isla to bed the night before and that when they woke up, Isla had disappeared early that morning. Cristie travels to a coastal town in Maine to visit her boyfriend Raymond. She falls asleep on the couch while Raymond's father, Robert, drives. When Robert received a call from Cristie's father informing him that Isla was missing, Robert was shocked and found a suitable place to stop the car and wake Cristie. Cristie was still sleepy, but when she heard her father's voice herself, she began to understand that she had no idea where her daughter was. In desperation, Cristie changed direction to look for Isla. The trip to the police station lasted an hour, but for Cristie, it felt like a century. She called Justin several times to find out what had happened, but there was no response. When they got to the police station, both Cristie and her father-in-law Robert gave statements. After about 30 minutes, Cristie's father arrived at the police station with them, angry and upset. Justin called 911 on Saturday morning at 8:49 to report Isla missing. He said he last saw Isla the night before at 10 p.m., when his sister Alicia checked on Isla before going to bed. However, when they woke up the next morning, they discovered that Isla had disappeared from her crib. Justin suspected that an unknown intruder had taken Isla. News of Isla's disappearance quickly spread to the police. The sheriff told the media that the case was being actively investigated and their goal was to find Isla at all costs. Police continued to search the house for more clues. On Sunday, December 18th, police dogs were deployed and searched the area around the house where Isla was. Cristie's house also underwent a thorough search. On Monday, December 19th, the FBI requested assistance in the search. By this time, 75 people from various agencies were involved in the search. The state police had seized 2 vehicles. One was a 1996 Ford Explorer, owned by Justin, and the other was a silver car, owned by Justin's girlfriend Courtney, who was also present on the night of the disappearance. On Wednesday evening, Justin made his first statement to the media. He was calm and claimed he did not know what happened to Isla. Justin also said that he and his family would support the investigation and do everything possible to find Isla. Justin said that Cristie had agreed to let him raise the child. Justin also said that Cristie was incapable of caring for Isla. As of day 10, a $30,000 reward has been offered for anyone who can provide a lead to Isla's rescue, and 330 leads have been followed. The operation also involved about 50 volunteers from the Search and Rescue Association. The sheriff has transferred the investigation to the state police's Major Crimes Unit. At that time, an announcement was made that the case was no longer a search for a missing girl but was being treated as a criminal investigation. In the early days, Justin tried to avoid the media but later appeared more frequently. During an appearance on the Today's Show, Justin claimed that Isla had been kidnapped and wanted the kidnapper to return Isla. When asked about Justin's silence in the early days of Isla's disappearance, he justified himself by saying that he thought Isla would return. He also claimed that the police had advised him to stay away from the press. The police explained that this was only told to him at first. Later, the police encouraged Isla's parents to continue to appear in public. In late January, police revealed a major discovery. Isla's blood was found in multiple locations throughout Justin's home. In his 1996 Ford Explorer, they discovered a child seat in the back with Isla's blood on the left shoulder strap. In Isla's bedroom, police found blood on some of Isla's princess pink sneakers on the floor next to the crib, as well as on the doll's face and arms. This suggests that Isla may have tried to clean the blood from her mouth with her toy. Additionally, a blood stain was found on the living room sofa. Most of the blood stains were concentrated in the basement. A pool of Isla's blood stained the center of the mattress that Justin shared with Courtney. Justin's sneakers were also found with Isla's blood on them. Police also discovered blood splatters on the cement floor around the bed and on the walls. These splatters matched Isla's height. Additionally, experts determined that some of the blood splatters in the house were likely caused by Isla coughing, suggesting that Isla's injuries were both internal and external. This suggests that Isla may have been severely injured and may have been brutally attacked. Police said the bed sheet was used to clean Isla's blood. When they learned this information, Cristie and her family were shocked and could not believe it. Police warned them that the evidence that was about to be revealed would be even more horrifying. Luminol tests were performed on the house, revealing blood stains that were not visible to the naked eye. Photos taken at the scene left Cristie in great pain. After viewing these photos, she left the police station in a state of panic. The police said there were more photos to show her, but Cristie refused to see them. She said she had enough. According to reports, when police showed Justin and his family the photos, he had no reaction. After learning of the police information, Cristie shared with the press that despite her feelings of grief and helplessness, Isla's father, Justin, Alicia, and Courtney were still walking down the street as if nothing had happened. In September 2013, Cristie wrote a bombshell letter to the press about the evidence and photos she had been given by the police. She was tired of waiting and wanted to rekindle public interest in Isla's case. In the spring of 2016, a group of journalists went to Justin's mother's house. Alicia opened the door and the journalists asked about the blood evidence. Justin's mother explained that Isla was lactose intolerant and had been vomiting. However, a quick internet search shows that common symptoms of lactose intolerance are gas, bloating, abdominal pain, and diarrhea, while nausea and vomiting are listed, but they are not the most common symptoms, let alone vomiting blood. Then, in 2017, at Cristie's request, a judge officially declared Isla dead. Based on her father, Justin, reporting that Isla had gone missing on December 17, 2011, Cristie and her attorney then filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Justin. By that time, Justin had disappeared, and he and his attorneys denied any wrongdoing, arguing that there was no concrete evidence. Earlier this year, 2023, a judge granted Cristie's petition to include Phoebe and Alicia in the wrongful death lawsuit. Justin is facing civil charges for murder. Additionally, Justin faces charges of breach of parental duty of care for a minor. Both Cristie and her attorney know that they will not receive any financial compensation from Justin. That is not the goal of the lawsuit. Their goal is to get information and facts out. There are many strange things about Isla's disappearance. While Isla was with Justin, he called the friend who sold him a $25,000 life insurance policy on Isla a few weeks ago. It is worth noting that Justin stayed at this friend's house while detectives investigated Isla's disappearance. Claimed that Justin had not been involved in the child's life during the 9 months of pregnancy and when Isla was just over a year old. Cristie also revealed that she had received strange messages from Justin on the day he brought Isla home. He mentioned being afraid that someone would try to kidnap or take Isla away. The last time he said something similar was around December 11th, 6 days before Isla was reported missing. After Isla went missing, the messages became more surprising and confusing. The end of the case. Poor Isla is still not found. Those responsible for Isla's death. Still no punishment. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lisa Harnum. Lisa Cecilia Harnum was born on June 12, 1981, in the Toronto suburbs of Canada, as the second child in her family. She was raised alongside her older brother Jason, with whom she has always been very close. Their single mother, Joanna, brought them up independently, since their father left the family when they were very young and played no further role in their lives. Lisa and her brother had no memories of him. From an early age, Lisa grew up to be an active and purposeful girl. She participated in sports with her brother, attended martial arts classes, and enjoyed playing soccer and volleyball. However, her true passion was ballet, which she practiced at the dance studio for several hours daily. As a tall and slender child, Lisa's professional ballet training required a strict diet, which unfortunately had a detrimental effect on her growing body. During adolescence, Lisa developed anorexia as a result of her eating disorders. For a long time, she kept her problem hidden, believing she could overcome it alone. However, when her weight dropped to critically low levels, her mother intervened and had Lisa hospitalized for several months to recover and gain weight. After graduating, she pursued dancing classes and decided to enter the beauty industry. Alongside her university studies, She worked as a perfumer at a large cosmetics chain store, and in her free time, studied makeup and hairdressing techniques. When she turned 24, Lisa moved to Australia in 2005, driven by a desire for drastic change. She wanted to escape to a warmer climate and explore the world. On a one-year work visa, Lisa traveled to another continent. Her mother, Joanna, accompanied her for the first few months to ensure a smooth transition. Once satisfied that her daughter was settled, Joanna returned to Toronto, confident that Lisa could take care of herself. Lisa settled in Sydney, renting a cozy apartment, and soon landed a job at a small local cosmetology company. Once her visa expired, she made the decision to make Australia her permanent home. To achieve this, she first extended her stay for another year, and then began preparing the necessary documents required to obtain Australian citizenship. Lisa faced challenges in her personal life, partly due to her preference for older men, possibly stemming from her absent father figure. In 2006, she started a romance with a coworker nearly twice her age at Sydney Cosmetics. They moved in together, and her family approved. They traveled extensively, but eventually broke up a year after their engagement, with the age difference likely a factor. In 2010, Lisa graduated from the Sydney College of Stylists and landed a job as a hairdresser at a popular beauty salon, where she swiftly earned the respect of her colleagues and the trust of her clients. Around the same time, she started dating a new boyfriend, but their romance was short-lived after Lisa discovered he was married. Refusing to get involved in destroying someone else's family, she ended the relationship promptly. Before that, at a party, her boyfriend had introduced her to his friend, Simon Gitney, a businessman. This chance encounter would ultimately prove disastrous for Lisa. Born in December 1973 in Maryland, Simon Gitney came from a large, religious family of Lebanese immigrants. Raised alongside 5 siblings in a strict, obedient household, Simon struggled to control his emotions and anger from a young age. He was possessive, intolerant of rejection, and prone to violent outbursts, which eventually led to serious legal troubles. At 18, Simon Gitney was first incarcerated for harassing his ex-girlfriend at her workplace. The store owner intervened, but Simon returned with friends, assaulted the owner, and was subsequently arrested. Due to good behavior, he only served a few months before being released on bail. 3 years later, Simon was arrested again, this time for theft. He resisted arrest, engaged in a violent struggle, and bit off a policeman's earlobe. Although he faced a severe prison sentence, the pastor of the Lebanese Christian church, which his family belonged to, intervened on his behalf. As a result, Simon served only a year and a half in prison. In 2000, Simon was arrested for drugs. He served 2 years of a 4-year sentence. After his release, Simon transformed his life. He co-founded a luxury shoe business, invested in real estate and a premium car, and hid his criminal past from others. Simon and Lisa exchanged numbers at a party and started chatting. When Lisa complained about her living situation, Simon offered her a free room in his apartment while she looked for a new place. Despite her mom's concerns, Lisa moved in, thinking Simon might be gay due to his appearance and piercings. They lived separately for months, but grew closer over time, and a romance blossomed. Simon, 37, and Lisa, 28, were a couple. To Lisa, Simon seemed like a charming prince from a fairy tale. He was outgoing, cheerful, and lavished his love with gifts and surprises. They went everywhere together, including the elite sports club, which Simon had been attending for years. Lisa thought she had found her soulmate and would live happily ever after with him. She couldn't stop talking about him to her mom, brother, and friends, unaware that their fairy tale was about to come to an end. Simon's behavior changed 6 months in, but Lisa didn't notice. He distanced her from friends and family, erased her boundaries, and tried to control her views and tastes. He convinced her to quit her job at a beauty salon where she was happy by throwing a scene and forcing her resignation. A month and a half after that, the couple relocated to a luxurious 15th-floor apartment in an elite residential complex. Unbeknownst to Lisa, the apartment was heavily equipped with hidden surveillance cameras. Simon gifted Lisa an expensive smartphone and laptop, pre-installed with spyware that enabled him to monitor her messages, emails, and calls, as well as track her every move. He also gained access to her social media accounts, giving him the power to delete friends, posts, and photos at will. Catani's control over Lisa's life intensified daily, but he cleverly made it seem as though Lisa was voluntarily complying with his demands. He had invaded every aspect of her life, eliminating any semblance of privacy. Catani dictated Lisa's appearance, forbidding her from wearing makeup, claiming it made her look tacky, and instead bought her dull gray and black clothing, discarding her old outfits as too revealing. He restricted her movements, only allowing her to leave the apartment accompanied by him, and solely visiting places of his choice. He even banned her from going to the gym, instead purchasing expensive exercise machines, citing that she could now work out from home. Lisa's social media friend lists were shrinking daily, and Ghani finally convinced her to delete her accounts. With no friends left in real life, all her contacts and calls were closely monitored by Simon, who only allowed her to communicate with her mother and brother. During her last visit home in December 2010, Lisa decided to fly to Canada to spend Christmas with her family. Simon had planned to accompany her, but his urgent business matters prevented him from doing so. Despite initial reservations, he eventually agreed to let her travel alone, provided she adhered to his strict rules and conditions. When Lisa arrived, Jason and Joanna were astonished by the drastic changes they saw in her. She was a shadow of her former bright and cheerful self, now devoid of makeup, with her luxurious hair hidden under a headdress and dressed in unflattering all-black attire. However, it was the internal changes that were truly alarming. Lisa would flinch at every phone ring, instantly grabbing the receiver, as per Simon's instruction to answer calls immediately, regardless of the time or her activities. During her stay at her mother's house, Lisa refused to see friends and rarely ventured out. Joanna was shocked by her daughter Lisa's behavior and decided to talk to her. Lisa broke down, revealing that Simon controls her life, tracking her every move and restricting her freedom. He doesn't let her work, see friends, or pursue hobbies. Joanna was horrified, urging Lisa to stay in Canada, but Lisa insisted she loved Simon and believed he'd eventually calm down. Despite her family's pleas to stay, Lisa decided to move back to Australia to be with Simon, disregarding their warnings that the relationship was unhealthy. She reassured her mother that everything would be fine, saying Simon loved her and wouldn't harm her. However, after her return, the situation deteriorated significantly. Simon restricted her from leaving the apartment, and when they went out together, he demanded that she keep her eyes fixed on her feet, avoiding eye contact with other men. Moreover, he started calling her Cecilia, her second name, as he believed it was more respectable. In the spring of 2011, Lisa started complaining about pain in her leg, an old injury from her youth when she took ballet classes. Instead of taking her to the hospital, Ghani hired a female physical therapist to give Lisa massages 3 times a week at their home. The therapist soon became Lisa's closest friend and confidant, and Lisa openly shared her concerns about her difficult situation with her. On June 12th, Simon organized a birthday party for Lisa at the most expensive restaurant in Sydney, but the guest list only included his relatives and close friends. Lisa wasn't allowed to invite anyone she wanted, making it an isolating celebration. At the end of the evening, Simon proposed to Lisa by putting a ring on her finger. She accepted, but her tears were not of happiness. Instead, they were tears of desperation and hopelessness, noticeable to everyone present. Back home, Lisa called her mother and tearfully shared the news of her engagement. However, her mother, Joanna, was not pleased with the announcement. She tried to convince Lisa to end the relationship and return to Canada as soon as possible. Lisa asked her mother to avoid discussing this over the phone, as she had already realized that her fiancé, Simon, was eavesdropping on their conversations. Lisa attempted to focus on the upcoming wedding and started making plans. When she tried to discuss the details with Simon, he curtly dismissed her, informing her that he would select the venue, choose her dress, and create the guest list. Lisa felt utterly powerless, having no say in the matter. During a subsequent physiotherapy session, Lisa confessed that she couldn't continue like this, but felt trapped because Simon refused to let her go. The physiotherapist and Lisa devised a plan. At each session, Lisa would secretly pass some of her belongings to the therapist for safekeeping, all while ensuring Simon remained unaware of her actions. On July 28th, Simon rushed out of the house, leaving his laptop behind, which was unusual for him since he always carried it with him. Lisa seized the opportunity to investigate, and her worst suspicions were confirmed. She discovered a spyware program on the laptop, which Simon had used to obtain all her phone data and recordings of her conversations with her mother. Even more disturbingly, she found surveillance footage from the security cameras installed in every room of their apartment. On the same day, Lisa used her physical therapist's phone to call her mother and begged her to take the next available flight to come and rescue her from the apartment. However, Joanna couldn't drop everything immediately. She needed time to arrange a shift swap with a colleague. In hindsight, Joanna would always regret this delay. Back home, Simon quickly realized that his fiancée had discovered the spyware on his laptop. Lisa broke down in tears, trying to understand why Simon would do such a thing, but he justified his actions by claiming they were for her own good. On July 29th, an intense conversation took place between the young couple, a recording of which would later be presented in court. Lisa was overcome with emotion and asked to leave, but Simon remained calm and assured her that this would never happen, suggesting that she was suffering from mental health issues. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa woke up early, got dressed, and gathered her important documents and belongings in her purse. She locked herself in the bathroom and made a final phone call to her mother, warning her that if anything bad happened to her, it would be Simon's fault. It seemed Lisa was attempting to sneak out of the apartment while Simon slept, but unfortunately she was unsuccessful. What happened next is unclear, but according to neighbors, they heard a scream in the hallway. However, before they could react, the noise abruptly stopped, and exactly a minute later, a young woman fell to her death from the 15th floor balcony. Passers-by on the street also heard the scream and saw the body falling from a great height, but they didn't have time to understand what was happening. A man walking his dog that morning, who was closest to the scene, heard a noise and looked up. He saw a man holding something large, which he then threw down. When people arrived at the scene, they found a young woman lying on the ground, but despite their efforts, they couldn't help her. She died instantly, having suffered severe injuries. 3 minutes later, Ghani, still in his pajamas, ran out into the street, crying and saying he didn't know how he was going to live without his fiancée, claiming he hadn't caught her in time. At first, it seemed like an accident, but Ghani quickly claimed that his fiancée had intentionally ended her life. A note found in his pocket and a disturbing video suggested that something strange was going on. After the body was taken to the morgue and examined, a torn note was found in different pockets with the message, "There are cameras everywhere in the apartment." It's likely Lisa was afraid Simon would discover the note, so she ripped it into small pieces and scattered them among her pockets. An investigation revealed that indeed, multiple cameras were installed in the apartment, but the hard drive containing the recordings was nowhere to be found. Simon claimed that there were no video recordings at all. However, a surveillance camera in the communal hallway caught a disturbing scene. The short footage shows Lisa fleeing the apartment and calling for help, but Simon grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and drags her back inside. This incident occurred just a minute before she fell off the balcony, and it was the scream that the neighbors heard. Ghani's laptop contained a recording of a conversation between Ghani and Lisa from the night before the tragedy, as well as spyware that Simon used to monitor his fiancée's activities. Simon claimed that he and Lisa had an argument that morning, during which she became hysterical and ran out into the hallway, screaming. He said he managed to bring her back inside because he didn't want to attract the attention of their neighbors. According to Simon, he then tried to call Lisa's mother, but she ran out to the balcony and jumped to her death just as he was doing so. Simon admitted that Lisa had previously threatened to take her own life, but he hadn't taken her warning seriously. Meanwhile, Ghani attributed the spyware on his laptop to Simon's supposed concern for Lisa's safety. During the trial, Simon was accompanied by Rachel Louise, a 22-year-old model who bore a striking resemblance to his late fiancé. However, it was later alleged that Rachel Louise was only using Simon to gain fame and attention, and that she willingly spoke to the press and appeared on TV to declare that Simon was incapable of harming a woman. Simon's lawyers attempted to persuade the court that Lisa was unstable, prone to outbursts, and potentially responsible for her own death, despite evidence of her long battle with anorexia and her treatment at a clinic. They also claimed that Simon, being shorter, would have been physically incapable of lifting Lisa, who was taller, or throwing her over the balcony. However, a gym trainer who regularly saw Simon testified that he was much stronger than he appeared and could easily have lifted Lisa, contradicting the defense's claims. This was further supported by the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the railing and glass barrier, which suggested she could not have jumped without touching them. Additionally, the physiotherapist who had been confided in by Lisa and received her belongings in the hope of escaping her abusive relationship testified in court, providing crucial evidence. In the end, Ghani was found guilty of murdering his fiancée and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. After the verdict was announced, Rachel Louise became enraged and started insulting the judge, which led to her removal from the courtroom. Simon and his legal team attempted to appeal the court's decision, but all their efforts were unsuccessful, and the verdict stood. Following the verdict, Rachel ended her relationship with her boyfriend, citing in an interview that it was challenging to maintain a relationship while he was incarcerated, although she still believes he is innocent. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Irene Cortez. Irene Cortez, née Lucas, was born in 1980 in Granada, Spain. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a successful small business, which her mother, Maria Lucas, expanded and continued to operate after her father's early passing. Thanks to her mother's efforts and the help of her uncle, Pedro Lucas, Irene wanted for nothing. As the eldest of the three siblings, she was a beautiful, outgoing girl who loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and became pregnant at 17, giving birth to her first child. 2 years later, she had her second child. Despite becoming a mother at a young age, Irene's family supported her in pursuing a good education. In the early 2000s, Irene relocated to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and their 2 children. There, she launched an entertainment venue that quickly gained popularity and became profitable. Initially, it was a small disco bar, but it eventually evolved into a full-fledged nightclub in Malaga. They welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. However, tragedy struck when Irene's husband was arrested at the age of 25 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Sadly, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. With her husband gone, Irene was left alone to care for their children. Drawing strength from her own mother, who had single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. Despite the challenges, she successfully managed her business, earning a good income, and had ambitious plans for the future. Ferd Saras, born in 1976 in Baronia, Colombia, grew up in a large, impoverished family as the youngest of his siblings. After his parents separated in the early 1990s, he stayed with his mother while his older siblings became independent. In 2001, at the age of 25, Ferd and his elderly mother moved to Spain in search of a better life, settling in Malaga, where he took on any job to support them. In 2005, Ferd began working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. She quickly noticed his hard work and reliability and was also drawn to him. Ferd, in turn, did his best to impress her. At the time, Irene's husband was in prison, and she intended to file for divorce once he was released, but he died unexpectedly before she could do so. Irene and Ferd's employer-employee relationship soon evolved into romance. Despite Irene having 3 children from previous relationships, and Ferd's humble background as a waiter who received a salary from her, their relationship blossomed. Within months of starting their relationship, they made the decision to cohabit. They moved into Irene's spacious apartment, and shortly after, Irene became pregnant with Ferd's child. They went on to have 2 children together. Although it is unclear whether they formally got married, Irene retained her first husband's surname, whereas the children she had with Ferd took on the Saras surname. Irene's past repeated itself in 2009 when her husband Ferd was arrested for distributing illegal substances and imprisoned. Just like her first husband, Ferd's imprisonment left Irene alone to care for their 5 children. Although he was sentenced to 3 years, Ferd served only 1.5 years due to good behavior and cooperation with the authorities. During Ferd's imprisonment, Irene found comfort in the arms of another man and lived with him for 1.5 years. However, upon his release, Ferd discovered Irene's infidelity and was understandably furious. He threatened Irene and her lover, even coming close to attacking the man, but narrowly avoided further legal trouble. Ultimately, the situation was resolved peacefully. Ferd chose to forgive Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed their life together, as if the imprisonment and infidelity had never occurred. Irene's family members had always harbored doubts about Ferd. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting that Ferd was only interested in Irene's wealth. Additionally, Irene's older children from her previous marriage never accepted Ferd, whereas the youngest, whom Ferd had raised since the age of 2, saw him as a father figure. In early 2011, Irene's husband Ferd told her he needed to visit his homeland of Colombia because his father was severely ill. Ferd's estranged father had been diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the situation. Irene, who had always wanted to visit Colombia, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Ferd's father, whom she had never met, and experience the famous Barranquilla Carnival, which usually takes place in late February. Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation in years due to her dedication to work and raising their 5 children, saw this trip as a much-needed break. They planned a 10-day trip, and Irene's mother and younger sister agreed to take care of her children during that time. Despite her mother Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene ignored her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Although Irene had €3,000 in cash saved at home, she discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared on the eve of their trip, almost canceling their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends, booked their flight tickets, and reserved a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that would tragically be her last. On February 27, 2011, Irene and her partner Ferd arrived in Colombia after an uneventful flight and checked into their hotel. Irene called her mother to reassure her that they had arrived safely. However, 2 days later, Ferd informed Irene's 14-year-old son that his mother had died. At first, Ferd claimed that Irene had died in an accident, but it soon emerged that she had been murdered during a robbery at a bar in the Baronia neighborhood. The case quickly gained widespread media attention in Colombia, with reports suggesting that Irene, a Spanish tourist, had been killed by robbers who had fled the scene, prompting a massive police manhunt. However, The circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed suspicious. The attackers did not appear to have stolen anything, instead shooting Irene in the heart before fleeing in haste. Despite witnessing the shooting, Ferd appeared calm during an interview with journalists, which did not match the image of a grieving widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed Irene's murder and announced that her remains would be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd remain unclear, and authorities are currently pursuing the attackers responsible for the senseless crime. Surveillance footage provided crucial clues in the mysterious death of Irene Cortez. The footage, captured by cameras at the scene of the crime, shed light on the events of March 1st. That evening, Irene and her partner Ferd Garris had made plans to meet Ferd's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 friends spent the day at the carnival, took a stroll around town, and then headed to a local bar for dinner and entertainment, following Farid's suggestion. By 1 a.m., Irene, Ferd, and his relatives were the only customers remaining at the bar. At around 2 a.m., 2 young men, who looked out of place, sat down away from the group. They didn't order anything and seemed uncomfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager due to their suspicious behavior. Additionally, their youthful appearance prompted the manager to check if they were of legal age to be in the bar. When asked for their IDs, the young men refused to comply, and when told to leave, one of them pulled out a gun, aiming it at the manager. The other man produced a knife, but quickly moved out of the camera's view. The gunman pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing that they were being robbed and demanding that they hand over their mobile phones and cash. The man with the knife reappeared, presumably to collect the valuables, while the gunman continued to threaten the group. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Faced with the gunman, Irene was ordered to stand up so that Ferd could be searched. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant suddenly lunged at her with the hand holding the gun. A shot was fired, striking Irene directly in the chest, causing her to collapse to the floor. The assailants then fled the scene without taking any valuables. Ferd and his brother chased after the robbers, while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding, and his brother's wife called the emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits escaped. The men returned to the bar, trying to aid Irene, but it was too late. The emergency responders arrived quickly, but Irene died on the way to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. A massive manhunt was launched to catch the perpetrators, followed by their arrest and trial for the robbery and murder that took Irene Cortez's life. With the city full of tourists for the carnival, law enforcement utilized all available resources to ensure their safety. The next day, the authorities apprehended the primary suspect, Brian Dario, who was identified as the gunman. Shortly after, Dario implicated his partner in crime, Juan Carlos. The 18-year-old Juan Carlos subsequently surrendered to the police, hoping to receive a more lenient sentence. During the interrogation, Dario claimed that financial difficulties, debts, and a sick child in need of expensive medical treatment drove him to commit the crime, a claim later supported by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring when he tried to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos claimed he was an unknowing participant in the crime, saying that Brian had not shared his plans with him. According to Juan Carlos, Brian only asked him to provide backup in a job where he would carry a small knife purely for intimidation purposes, not to cause harm. He also claimed that once he realized Brian's true intentions, he left the scene. However, the surveillance footage told a different story, clearly showing Juan Carlos returning to Brian after he initially left. With both Juan Carlos and Brian in police custody and having confessed to the crime, it seemed like the case was closed, and they would soon be facing prison sentences. Dario was sentenced to 23 years in prison for robbery and homicide, while Carlos got 17 years. However, new evidence pointed to Ferd's involvement, including his wife's family accusing him of masterminding her murder. A private investigator found that Ferd had access to missing €3,000, which may have been used to pay Dario. Ferd also lied about his father's cancer to justify a trip to Colombia, and suspiciously suggested visiting the crime scene, staying late into the night. The detective conducted a thorough examination of the camera recordings, interpreting the footage and drawing his own conclusions. He observed that the criminal's behavior was unusual. Juan appeared frightened and seemed uncertain about what was happening, while Brian approached Ferd and lifted him up, but didn't directly threaten him with a gun. It seemed like he were acquainted and were acting in unison. Next, Ferd moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table, in a peculiar manner. When she reached into her bag to retrieve her wallet, the gunman looked at Ferd as if waiting for a signal. It's unclear whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband moved out of camera view shortly after the shot. The man chased the killer, but in the expert's opinion, he deliberately allowed him to escape. However, this assertion can be disputed, as Brian was armed with a gun, and Ferd could reasonably have feared for his life. After the chosen one was declared dead, the man's behavior raised questions. Despite the tragedy, he appeared composed, giving interviews to reporters and discussing details of the event, without showing visible signs of distress or grief. Another puzzling aspect was his decision to inform Irene's 14-year-old son of his mother's death, rather than contacting her mother, uncle, or other adult relatives. According to Maria Lucas, this choice was deliberate, intended to inflict pain on the teenager, as punishment for not respecting the stepfather's authority. Irene's uncle, Pedro Lucas, was the first to speak out in the press, sharing his suspicions and the investigation's findings. He believed that Ferd had planned the trip in advance, luring Irene into a trap. The stolen money was allegedly used to hire a killer, and Ferd intended to assume guardianship over the children and take control of his late wife's business. Ferd's mother came to her son's defense, insisting that he loved Irene and her children deeply and would never harm them. However, she inadvertently revealed a telling detail, mentioning that Irene's infidelity had offended Ferd's pride, suggesting a potential motive for the crime. A new development emerged concerning Garris leaving Spain, allegedly using fake documents to do so. This was noteworthy because he was not allowed to leave the country at that time, having recently been released from prison on parole. Garris denied this information, claiming he left Spain legally and that Irene acted as his guarantor. Irene's body was returned to her native Spain 12 days after the tragedy, and a closed casket funeral was held due to the decomposition of her remains. Hundreds attended the funeral, including family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez, but wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person absent from the farewell ceremony was Ferd, who feared returning from Colombia due to concerns about potential retribution. Ferd claimed that his late wife's relatives had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. Before flying back to Spain, he intended to request protection from the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Garris decided not to take the risk. In response, Ferd filed a court complaint against his deceased wife's relatives, alleging they prevented him from returning home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they wanted him to return to Spain to face trial. New court proceedings focused on fresh claims against Ferd, questioning Dario and Carlos in a Colombian prison about their link to Garris and prior planning. Brian denied this, saying the murder was an unplanned result of a botched robbery, and he never met Ferd before. Dario admitted that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances on the evening in question, which explained his poor recollection of the event's chronology. Carlos, on the other hand, maintained that his friend had not involved him in his plans, and that everything that happened in the bar had been as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Juan seemed to be telling the truth, but Brian's words about who made the fatal shot raised some doubts. It was puzzling that, Despite not committing the robbery, Brian ended up in prison, yet his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people who learned about his motive had helped him. However, the Lucas family lawyers attempted to prove that the €3,000 stolen from Irene, which Ferd had paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment, but this version was never proven. Garris decided to return to Spain only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Garris claimed to have brought investigation materials that proved his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months after the incident, Ferd granted a major interview in which he shared a devastating update. He had lost almost everything that mattered. He was unemployed, his passport had been revoked, and as a result, he was stuck in the country with no way to leave. To make matters worse, his friends had abandoned him, and his late wife's mother and uncle had forbidden him from seeing his own children. Ferd repeatedly clashed with Maria and Pedro Lucas in court, alleging that they had threatened him. Meanwhile, they tried to prove that he was involved in Irene's murder. Despite their efforts, neither party could provide sufficient evidence to support their claims. In the end, the grandmother and uncle retained custody of the children, and Ferd was unable to inherit any of his late wife's assets. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Cristie Schoen. Cristie Schoen, a chemistry graduate student at San Diego State University, had the potential for a bright future. However, she is now serving a life sentence at a women's facility in Central California for crimes committed against her husband, Ralph, and Constance Schoen. Cristie is a mother of 3, and despite her efforts to prepare them for a successful future, her own life took a different turn. Her children were receiving a well-rounded education with regular schooling, tutors, and participation in extracurricular activities designed to develop their talents. However, Cristie, who was fragile and impulsive, struggled to maintain this pace. She began to skip classes and sought escape from her reality, initially finding comfort and forgetfulness in this avoidance. However, after consuming alcohol, the calming effect wore off, and Cristie became dependent on methamphetamine, the most addictive illegal substance in the United States. The drug induced clouds of paranoia, euphoria, and hallucinations, leading to Cristie's erratic behavior and detachment from reality, as well as a lack of parental attention. Cristie confessed to being addicted to substances since her high school days, which was devastating news for her family of college-educated professionals. After months of turmoil with her parents, the 17-year-old Cristie secretly left home and went on vacation to Mexico with her friends, where she met Gregory DeVette, a tall, handsome man, 7 years her senior. Gregory took on a paternal role, and Cristie landed a job at the local forensic department as a toxicology assistant, impressing her employers with her skills and momentarily forgetting her addiction. Her position in toxicology gave Cristie access to controlled substances, and she went on to graduate from college with honors. Her relationship with Gregory lasted about 5 years, culminating in a grand wedding on May 5, 1999. Cristie's parents adored Gregory and were convinced that their daughter had overcome her dependency and was headed towards a life of great promise and happiness. In March 2000, Cristie landed a job as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, where she learned to analyze body fluids for controlled substances. However, she soon became disillusioned with her mundane life and sought thrills elsewhere. She found an opportunity with her new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had just been appointed head of the department. As their romance blossomed, Cristie's marriage to Gregory began to unravel, despite his efforts to save it. Aware of his wife's vulnerabilities, Gregory struggled to hold on, but Cristie had made up her mind. On Monday, May 6th, she asked for a divorce. On November, Kristen went to work as usual, but she was very tired and worried about her husband Greg, who was sick and stayed home. In the days following their difficult conversation, Kristen was uneasy, but Greg seemed calm and indifferent. Uncharacteristically, Kristen informed her workplace about her husband's illness and visited him during her lunch break. That same day, at 9:22 p.m., Greg was asleep, and Kristen called the emergency services to report that her husband was not breathing, fearing he might have taken his own life. Overwhelmed with emotion, Kristen cried on the phone and didn't follow the dispatcher's instructions to examine Greg's body and potentially administer first aid. The police and paramedics arrived at the scene at 10:19 p.m. and found Greg lying lifeless on the bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered rose petals, with an exposed stem nearby. A preliminary examination revealed that Greg had likely consumed a lethal dose of multiple controlled substances, with empty vials of strong painkillers scattered around the room. Torn wedding photos were also found in his bed. During the interrogation, Kristen stated that she had told Greg about their separation the previous night, a mere 17 months after their wedding. Kristen regretted marrying him, feeling she had rushed into it. She mentioned that Greg was too clingy and she wanted space. Greg's death was officially classified as a suicide, with the autopsy revealing that he had succumbed to a lethal dose of strong sedatives. Kristen gave her consent for the cremation to proceed, but Gregory's family and friends were adamant that he would never take his own life. None of them had noticed any unusual changes in his personality or mood that might have hinted at his supposed suicide. In fact, Greg was known to be strongly opposed to controlled substances and would never resort to using them. His relatives were so convinced of foul play that they intervened to stop the cremation, demanding an independent autopsy to uncover the truth. The family's persistence led investigators to consider a murder scenario soon after the incident. An autopsy revealed a significant amount of fentanyl, a painkiller 150 times stronger than morphine, as well as smaller amounts of clonazepam and traces of oxycodone. Investigators suspected that someone else might have administered the lethal dose of fentanyl to Gregory, given the strong influence of clonazepam and other drugs found in his system. Since fentanyl is not an over-the-counter drug, Kristen became the prime suspect due to her knowledge and access to these substances. She was subsequently questioned by the police. During the police questioning, Kristen's disheveled appearance and erratic behavior suggested she was struggling with drug dependence, which she confirmed in her testimony. On the day of Gregory's death, Kristen's account of events was inconsistent. She initially told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later suggested he might have been taking oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Like other opioids, oxycodone can not only relieve pain, but also produce feelings of euphoria. However, it can weaken the respiratory system, and if not treated promptly, its use can be fatal. During their conversation with Kristen, police considered the possibility that Gregory's death was an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. They also learned that Gregory was distressed about their failed marriage, which led Kristen to claim that he had taken his own life. This sparked another investigation, which uncovered more details. On November 8th, Russ Lowe, a co-worker of Kristen's, contacted the police and informed them about Kristen's affair with her boss, Dr. Robertson. This new information shifted the direction of the police investigation. Investigators found evidence of Kristen's relationship with Dr. Robertson, including passionate emails and computer files. They also discovered Dr. Robertson's expertise in fentanyl through professional articles. The evidence pieced together to suggest that Gregory had become a threat to the lovers. As Kristen had access to labs and controlled substances, it was suspected that she was secretly using them, and Dr. Robertson was covering for her. Dr. Robertson told detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug addiction. Although no charges were filed against the couple at the time, they were both fired for violating several rules during the investigation. Serious trouble began for Kristen in January when police raided her house, finding drug traces and evidence of personal drug use. She was arrested but later released on bail. As the investigation progressed, new information emerged, including her diary, which was seized during the initial search. Apparently, Kristen tried to conceal her involvement and assert her innocence by creating the illusion that her husband Gregory's death was self-inflicted. On the day of his death, she bought a rose, revealing her internal motivations. The medical examination revealed that Gregory was unconscious for at least 6 hours before he died, and his death may have occurred an hour or an hour and a half before it was officially confirmed. Furthermore, bruises were found around the needle mark on his arm. A shortage of the drug that led to Gregory's death, as well as other controlled substances, were discovered at Kristen's workplace. Police believe Kristen poisoned Gregory with alcohol and fentanyl without his knowledge. Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After 6 months in detention, she was released on bail, and the first trial began soon after. The prosecution's main theory was that she killed Gregory because he threatened to damage her good girl reputation by revealing her repeated drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution alleged that Kristen fatally poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a synthetic opiate that is 80 times more potent than morphine. According to them, Kristen initially attempted to kill Gregory using clonazepam, but after this attempt failed, she administered the fentanyl. The prosecution also contended that Kristen subsequently staged the scene in the bedroom to give the impression that Gregory had committed suicide by tearing out pages from her diary, scattering rose petals around his body, and positioning a wedding photo nearby. The court was told that Kristen, a biochemistry graduate, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to kill Gregory. Prosecutors alleged that Kristen tried to make her colleagues at the medical examiner's office believe Gregory's death was a suicide by withholding information about the fentanyl. However, before the autopsy could take place, Kristen was transferred to a different laboratory, and attempts to alter the toxicology report were unsuccessful. It was stated that on the morning of November 6th, Kristen phoned the owner of Gregory's apartment to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after arriving at the lab around 9 a.m., Kristen was seen crying in her manager Michael's office. The apartment building where Kristen and Gregory lived reported seeing Kristen return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she visited a local grocery store, buying several items, including a credit card statement with red roses, which confirmed she was still alive a few hours before Gregory's death. Kristen made several calls to Dr. Michael Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy. Dr. Blackburn testified that Gregory had been dead for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. At the time of death, Gregory was in the early stages of bronchopneumonia, a condition that occurs when breathing secretions accumulate in the lungs due to unconsciousness or inadequate breathing. The doctor also noted that Gregory's bladder contained a substantial amount of urine, which would have caused significant discomfort if he were conscious. From this, Dr. Blackburn inferred that Gregory had experienced breathing difficulties for around 6 to 12 hours before his death. Dr. Blackburn testified that the amount of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was insufficient to cause an overdose and was not the cause of death. In contrast, Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, explained that fentanyl is a powerful and fast-acting painkiller with serious side effects, including the potential to lead to respiratory arrest. The speed at which fentanyl takes effect depends on how it is administered, with peak effects occurring approximately 16 hours after a transdermal patch is applied, 20 to 30 minutes after oral administration, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes of intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley noted that fentanyl is not usually given orally because the liver breaks down about 65% of it, leaving only 35% to enter the bloodstream. Both Dr. Blackburn and Dr. Stanley were unable to provide a clear explanation for how fentanyl entered Gregory's system. However, Dr. Stanley suggested that the varying concentrations of fentanyl in Gregory's body, combined with evidence that he was unconscious and breathing shallowly in the hours leading up to his death, indicate that fentanyl may have been administered to him. Although the prosecutor could not definitively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, the evidence suggested that she might have applied a fentanyl patch to his arm while he was sleeping. The fact that 15 patches went missing from the lab where Kristen previously worked supports this possibility. The defense claims Kristen is innocent, acknowledging that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but arguing that he intentionally took it to end his life due to desperation stemming from family problems. In court, Kristen testified that on November 6th, she woke up to find Gregory in distress. At 7:42 a.m., she called his employer to report his illness and absence from work. Kristen told the court she went to her job but returned home to check on Gregory, asking why he was so upset. Gregory told her he felt unwell, having taken oxycodone and clonazepam, and planned to stay home and sleep. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor questioned Kristen's explanation, pointing out its strangeness. Kristen admitted to previously lying and hiding Gregory's drug use. The prosecutor suggested to the court that fentanyl was the ideal poison due to its difficulty in detection, knowledge Kristen likely acquired from her job. According to autopsy and toxicology results, Gregory was unconscious for around 6 to 8 hours, contradicting Kristen's claim of having lunch with him that day. The defense argued that Dr. Blackburn's finding of non-fatal blood levels of clonazepam was irrelevant because the combination of oxycodone, an opiate, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, can create a synergistic effect, making them more potent together. They suggested that Gregory may have unintentionally taken the drugs himself and questioned why the high levels of these substances in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and murder under special circumstances by poisoning. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Despite maintaining her innocence and pleading no contest, Kristen's appeal was unsuccessful due to a mistake by her own defense team. They acknowledged that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites, which could have determined whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or if the fentanyl found in the samples resulted from laboratory contamination after his death. The appeals court was told that there was a problem with the handling of the autopsy samples, which could have affected their integrity. Specifically, the samples were stored in an unsealed cardboard box, with each container labeled as coming from Gregory's body. The box was left at the medical examiner's office for about 36 hours before being sent to the forensic laboratory, which raised concerns that someone with access to the office could have tampered with the samples during that time. Kristen's appeal argued that on November 8, 2000, Michael had informed a toxicologist that he had tested a sample of Gregory's stomach contents for fentanyl breakdown products. However, this information was not included in the original autopsy report. The Court of Appeal ruled that Kristen's lawyer should have objected to the prosecution's claim that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose and should have tested the autopsy samples for substances that break down into fentanyl, instead of just accepting that as the cause of death. Although the conviction was not overturned, the case was sent back to the federal court to determine whether this mistake by the defense could have changed the trial's outcome. U.S. Supreme Court ruled federal courts must respect state court decisions, denying Kristen's appeal and keeping her in custody. Her trial named Michael Robertson, Kristen Rossum's former boss and lover, as co-defendant. Though he's lived freely in Australia since 2000, he could be arrested and bailed for $100,000 if he returns to the US. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Cave. Jennifer was born in March 1984 near Bishop, Texas, where her family lived in a modest farmhouse. Her mother, Sharon, was in her second marriage, which added 3 children to the family: Jennifer, Lauren, and Clayton. Vanessa, from Sharon's first marriage, was the oldest sibling. Jennifer's father, Charlie, worked as a welder and was a decent husband and father, until his alcoholism turned him into a mean and unbearable person who would hurl insults and cause trouble. When he was sober, he was calm and respectable. Sharon's family stayed close despite their unstable home. She worked at a chemical plant and cared for the kids. Jennifer, unlike her outgoing siblings, was shy and book-smart, developing exceptional memory. However, her love for reading affected her eyesight, requiring glasses, which didn't boost her self-esteem, but didn't stop her from participating in school activities. Eventually, her father's destructive drinking habit caused her family to break apart. After the separation, Jennifer and her brother Clayton chose to stay with their father, Charlie. They showed him great compassion and tried to support him in overcoming his addiction, hoping to prevent his downfall. Jennifer was so desperate to help her father quit drinking that she ignored his lack of determination to fight his habit. 4 years after her parents' divorce, in 1999, Sharon met Jim Sedgwick, a new partner. As Jennifer entered her teenage years, she underwent a transformation. She got rid of her braces and contact lenses and replaced her glasses, which brought out her natural beauty. However, her personality began to change along with her physical appearance. She started socializing with kids from troubled families, but thanks to her high intelligence, she managed to graduate at the top of her class. Jennifer majored in finance at Texas State University, but soon became disillusioned, withdrawing after 1 semester. She then attended community college, worked part-time, and dated Mark from a respectable family. However, she began frequenting parties, drinking heavily, and using marijuana, possibly influenced by her father's substance abuse. On one fateful night, Jennifer Cave's life took a tragic turn when she met Colton Panic. A gunshot wound to her right arm ultimately led to her demise. The bullet pierced her arm and chest, striking her heart, causing rapid blood loss from a vital artery. Further examination revealed multiple stab wounds across her body, with the most severe injuries on her chest and neck. The attacker inflicted a total of 18 stab wounds after she had died. In an attempt to conceal the body, the perpetrator decapitated Jennifer and shot her through the throat into her head. They then tried to dismember her by severing her upper limbs and placed them in prepared bags and trash bags. The torso was left in the bathtub, covered with a saw. However, something disrupted the initial plan, forcing the perpetrator to change their actions. Upon discovering Jennifer's body, the police arrived but lacked a warrant to search Colton Patak's apartment. Initially, they could only observe the scene and secure the area. After obtaining the necessary warrant, a thorough search of the apartment was conducted. The investigation turned up 3.38 caliber shell casings, and the firearm was found in Patak's car, parked in the garage. A large, blood-stained machete was recovered from the dishwasher. Toxicology reports showed that Jennifer had alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in her system at the time of her death. In one of the rooms, investigators found a road atlas with certain pages torn out, specifically those highlighting routes in southwest Texas. This discovery provided a crucial clue, suggesting the reason behind the apartment owner's sudden disappearance. Colton Panic had fled the area. As a result, law enforcement immediately issued a warrant for his arrest. Colton was born in Bryant, Arkansas, and grew up to be a charming and clever boy who was popular among his female peers during his teenage years. His father's successful agricultural business provided the family with a comfortable lifestyle. However, this comfort seemed to spoil Colton, making him both ambitious and hot-tempered. In his free time, Colton was passionate about skateboarding and playing the guitar. He attended a Catholic boys' middle school in Little Rock, where he excelled academically, frequently making the honor roll. He was also a National Merit Scholarship finalist in 2000. By his senior year, Colton had started to get into trouble with alcohol and fights, largely due to his association with a group of wealthy kids who lived a life of leisure, often hosting parties with undesirable consequences. Despite these problems, his high graduation scores secured him admission to the University of Texas at Austin. Unfortunately, he failed to focus on his studies, instead continuing his reckless lifestyle, losing friends, and earning a reputation as a frequent drinker and marijuana user. If not for his self-destructive tendencies, Colton could have had a bright future. Colton was kicked out of his university fraternity and began selling drugs. His parents tried to help him overcome his addiction, even going so far as to take him back in at home. In the spring of 2004, Colton met Jennifer at a party, and they immediately clicked. Despite her tendency to idealize people, Jennifer decided to take a chance on Colton rather than walk away from the potentially dangerous relationship. Over time, their friendship blossomed into romance. As their relationship grew, Jennifer started using illegal drugs with Colton. His apartment, once luxurious, became a hub of excess, with drug use becoming a normal part of their daily lives. As a result, Jennifer's addiction worsened. Her parents repeatedly attempted to intervene, even giving her a car in the hopes that she would spend more time at home. However, each time she returned, her promises to change were short-lived. Colton's condition deteriorated, and he became increasingly paranoid. In an attempt to emulate a gangster, he started carrying a gun and knife. In 2004, he was arrested for possessing illegal substances and even attended a rehabilitation program. But he showed no genuine commitment to overcoming his addiction. Jennifer's parents visited her, but the visit was disappointing. She had failed to keep her promises, had lost a significant amount of weight, and looked unwell. Her family suggested she seek treatment at a rehabilitation center, but she refused outright. This upset her parents, Sharon and Jim, who then cut off her financial support, hoping that their tough love approach would motivate her to take control of her life. With no money, Jennifer had no choice but to move in with Colton. What happened between Jennifer and Colton in his apartment remains unclear, but after living with him for a month, Jennifer made the decision to leave. A friend came to her rescue, offering a room and emotional support. Although Jennifer confided in her friend about her fears and no longer felt safe around Colton, she chose not to elaborate on the details. Whatever it was, it clearly terrified her, and she refused to consider getting back together. When Colton showed up asking her to take him back, Jennifer stood firm in her decision. Her resolve only strengthened when she noticed he was carrying a knife. She urged him to calm down and suggested they maintain a platonic relationship instead. To her surprise, he agreed. From then on, Jennifer kept her distance from Colton and began rebuilding her relationship with her parents. For the first time, her life was slowly getting back on track. In early 2005, Jennifer started dating Scott, a single father who seemed like a breath of fresh air. Unlike Colton, Scott led a stable life, working as a waiter, playing keyboards in a band, and singing, all while staying sober. As they spent more time together, Jennifer's self-confidence grew, and she even looked healthier by his side. She took on a maternal role, caring for Scott's daughter and keeping their home. However, she still had a lingering fear that she might flee at a moment's notice if Colton were to call her again. Colton moved to the Orange Tree Apartments near the university after Laura Hall arrived. The complex had a pool, making it a party spot. Colton's behavior remained unpredictable, with friends reporting he played Russian roulette alone. It was at one of these parties he met Laura Ashley Hall, who became infatuated with him. She showed jealousy towards other women, especially Jennifer, and came across as arrogant to their peers. Colton and Laura started dating soon after. Like Jennifer, Laura was deeply drawn to Colton. When he was sentenced to 60 days in jail in June 2005, Laura sent him all her earnings, even going into debt. Friends noticed that she changed for the worse, becoming bolder, neglecting her job and personal care. Many believed she had also started using banned drugs. Unlike his behavior with Jennifer, Colton disregarded Laura's feelings, even going so far as to extinguish cigarettes on her. During this period, Jennifer broke up with Scott because she felt unworthy of his family and didn't want to cause them any problems. Although she occasionally talked to Colton, who still had feelings for her, she kept their conversations friendly and didn't rekindle their romance. Jennifer's main focus was on finding a job and going back to college. In August, things started looking up for her. She began dating Michael Rodriguez, and after completing a few days of training, landed a great job at a law firm. Jennifer felt proud of herself and was genuinely happy. On August 16th, she decided to celebrate her new life with friends. They went to a bar and then a club that evening. According to a friend, the bouncer refused to let Colton in because of his appearance, which might have led him to look for drugs. The investigation is ongoing to uncover what happened that fateful night. Investigators interviewed Colton's neighbors and discovered some interesting information. At around 3 a.m. on August 17th, Nora Sullivan heard a knock on her door and found Colton standing there, looking suspicious with blood on him and a visible gun at his waist. Startled, she asked him what had happened, and Colton claimed he had been in a shootout with some people. However, Nora didn't hear any gunshots and thought he was lying, as he often did. She closed the door and peeked through the peephole to see him eventually walk away. When questioned, none of the neighbors reported hearing any gunshots that night either. Detectives discovered that Colton had been in contact with Laura twice on the night of the murder. The next morning, August 17th, he visited a hardware store where he bought a saw, masks, gloves, and a large quantity of cleaning supplies. He used these items to dismember Jennifer's body and planned to clean the apartment to destroy any evidence of the crime. The unexpected arrival of Sharon and Jim may have startled him, causing him to flee. A crucial discovery in Colton's apartment led investigators straight to him. Colton, accompanied by Laura Hall, was tracked down in Mexico, where they had crossed the border in Laura's car. During this time, local authorities distributed Colton's photo nationwide. The couple enjoyed themselves in Mexico, visiting cinemas and restaurants, and stayed in a hotel in the border town of Pedas Negras. An employee at the hotel recognized Colton from the distributed photo and took his picture, sending it to the police. Mexican law enforcement arrested the pair and handed them over to U.S. officials at the border. Before being released, Laura Hall caused a scene with the Border Patrol, loudly proclaiming Colton's innocence and hindering the arrest process. However, she later admitted that their trip to Mexico was the best experience of her life. In total, they spent around 5 days abroad. On August 23, 2005, Colton Poniak was arrested and charged with a crime related to Jennifer Cave's death. A month later, Laura Hall was arrested and charged with tampering with evidence and obstructing justice. During the trial, prosecutors presented key evidence found in the apartment, including a store videotape and a receipt for items purchased. Colton claimed he had no memory of the night of August 16th-17th, blaming his amnesia on heavy drinking and illegal drug use. Initially, he didn't deny involvement in Jennifer's death, but insisted he had no recollection of the events. He claimed to have woken up to find his ex-girlfriend's body in the bathroom, and then contacted Laura, who allegedly advised him to buy a saw and cleaning supplies. Together, they allegedly dismembered the victim and hid the body parts in bags. Prosecutors argued that Laura was responsible for Jennifer's injuries after her death. Colton later implied that Laura might have been motivated by jealousy, suggesting she sought revenge against a romantic rival. Despite these allegations, both Colton and Laura pleaded not guilty. The evidence of Colton's involvement in the crime was overwhelming. His fingerprints and DNA were found on the machete, saw, and firearm at the crime scene, and the weapon in his car was identified as the one used in the crime. Additionally, Jennifer's body was found in his apartment, and he was the one who purchased the cleaning supplies from the store. The jury had no doubt of his guilt. On January 29, 2007, Colton Pontiac was sentenced to 55 years in prison with parole eligibility after serving at least half of his sentence, with his earliest release date set for 2060. The case against Laura Hall was more complex. The prosecution argued that she might have acted out of blind affection for Colton. While Laura's DNA was found on one of the victim's shoes, a store towel, and the firearm, the defense contended that this only indicated her involvement in disposing of the body, not in the initial act. They couldn't prove she was the one who fired the first shot that hit Jennifer in the head. Moreover, there was no evidence that placed her at the scene at the time of the crime. Laura maintained that she only learned of the crime when Colton told her, and claimed he forced her to flee to Mexico with him. However, witnesses from their time in Mexico reported that they seemed to enjoy their trip in 2007, which cast doubt on Laura's story. Laura Hall was convicted of obstructing justice and tampering with evidence and received a 6-year prison sentence. In a subsequent trial in 2010, she was given the maximum sentence of 11 years and a $144,000 fine. She was paroled on March 15, 2018, with GPS monitoring, and completed her sentence in August of the same year. However, her current whereabouts are unknown. Colton Pontiac is still in prison, where he has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been unsuccessful. Throughout these appeals, he has consistently claimed to have no memory of the tragic events of that night. However, he has revealed that there are witnesses who claim Laura confessed to Jennifer's death. Pontiac alleges that during the trial, the prosecutors were aware of this information, but failed to disclose it to his defense team, suggesting that he may have been set up. Although Pontiac's legal motions were denied, this revelation has raised questions among the public. Moreover, Jennifer's parents believe that Laura's punishment was too lenient. They are convinced that she played a more significant role in Jennifer's death than she admits. Unlike Colton, Laura has never expressed remorse or regret for Jennifer's death, often referring to her as that girl or the dead girl, and sometimes using derogatory terms. To this day, the specifics of that fateful night remain a mystery. Jennifer is the only one who knows the truth that the walls of Pontiac's residence keep hidden. Unfortunately, the dead cannot reveal their secrets. Jennifer's life was tragically cut short in its prime. If only she had realized sooner that staying away from certain people and cutting off ties with them can be a means of self-preservation. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sean Eckerd. Donna and Samuel Eckerd, who came from a long line of family relationships, tied the knot. Between them, they had 6 grown children from previous marriages. After facing numerous challenges in their early marriages, they found comfort and solace in each other. The couple decided to settle down in San Diego, California. They rented a spacious family home and never missed attending church services on weekends. A few years after their move, Donna gave birth to a son named Stanley, and 2 years later, Sean was born. Donna dedicated her life to raising her sons and taking care of the home. As a result, Stanley and Sean grew up in a loving and nurturing environment. They both attended a reputable local school, and every weekend, the entire family would participate in church activities without fail. The Eckerd family was a tight-knit one, with the adult children regularly keeping in touch and gathering together for family holidays, despite being scattered across the continent. Sean was a sociable and lively individual, boasting a charismatic personality that effortlessly drew people to him. He was an attentive listener and had a talent for empathy, making it easy for him to form friendships. In contrast, Stanley was more introverted and cautious around new people and experiences, which made socializing a bit more challenging for him. Despite their differing personalities and age gap, the brothers shared a common circle of friends and classmates. Unwaveringly loyal, they looked out for each other, often acting as one unit. As they grew up, they developed into well-mannered and academically successful young men. Their bond was built on trust and mutual respect, with their parents valuing respect above all else. Good-natured teasing between the brothers was commonplace, but always done in a light-hearted and humorous spirit. Donna and Samuel raised their children, instilling in them faith in God and guiding them according to God's laws. As the Eckerd brothers grew up, their lives unfolded naturally. However, their interests gradually diverged, becoming starkly different. Sean, the youngest, developed a passion for music and played in a band, while Stanley, the eldest, became fascinated with martial arts. Each brother's life was filled with vivid experiences and emotions, which they would share with the family in the evenings. Every evening, when the family gathered before dinner, Sean's stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans would dominate the conversation. The family would listen intently to Sean, leaving little time for Stanley to share his own experiences. Stanley felt that he didn't have grand plans or exciting stories to share, let alone friends to brag about. As a result, he humbly listened to his brother's stories, never getting the chance to share his own. On one memorable evening, Sean shared with his family that he had met a neighbor, Mary Jane, a delicate young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair. He was captivated by her and had been drawn to her house by the enchanting piano melodies drifting from her open window. Entranced, he walked into her home without knocking, but his self-assurance and charm helped him to extricate himself from the awkward situation and make a good impression on the girl he was interested in. Although Mary Jane was a few years older than Sean, they were able to maintain a friendly relationship. Sean, being the social butterfly, would often organize picnics, inviting Mary Jane to join in. They spent their time strolling, visiting parks, and taking in the views from observation decks. However, their blossoming adolescent romance was cut short by the harsh realities of the adult world. The Eckerd family received devastating news about the illness of Donna's elderly mother, Sean and Stanley's great-grandmother. In pursuit of a better life, Sean's parents tried to consider the interests of each family member, but their decision ultimately changed the course of their lives. Sean was reluctant to leave his hometown, his friends, and Mary Jane, but the decision had already been made. The Eckards left the city where their children had grown up and moved to a new state. In 2005, they settled in Donna's mother's house in Spring Hill, Florida, starting a fresh chapter. For the whole family, this move felt like a breath of fresh air, as it proved to be the right decision. Sean and Stanley's grandmother was recovering well. Initially, the move was tough on Sean, who missed his band, strolls with Mary Jane, and hangouts in his favorite city. However, Sean's optimistic nature soon took over, and he began to build a new life as vibrant as the one he had left behind. Donna and Samuel found jobs at the Presbyterian Church, where they spent most of their time. Donna looked after the children in the nursery, while Samuel assisted with the chapel. Over time, the brothers reconciled and made new friends together. At their new school, they revived their old life. Sean rejoined the school band, while Stanley attended a martial arts school near their home. Despite their busy schedules, Sean remained obsessed with Mary Jane. Every night, he'd lock himself in his room and talk to her on the phone for hours. Their goodbyes always ended the same way, with Sean promising to visit her once he got his parents' permission. While Sean held on to his first love, the more reserved and modest Stanley struggled to find his place within the family. In an attempt to assert himself, Stanley made a series of poor decisions that would ultimately have devastating consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, Stanley told his parents he was quitting school to focus on martial arts and start a club. However, his extreme enthusiasm led him to associate with the wrong crowd, and he began committing petty fraud and trying illegal drugs. In 2007, his questionable connections landed him in trouble with the law, and he was arrested for stealing and charged with felony fraud. The news of Stanley's misbehavior hit his mother, Donna, hard. She had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital, but a lawyer hired by her sister-in-law helped resolve the situation. The lawyer successfully defended Stanley, highlighting the lack of concrete evidence, which led to a suspended sentence. This experience terrified Stanley, leaving him feeling guilty and withdrawn as he hoped to be understood and accepted by his family. After what happened to Stanley, Sean kept his plans private during the summer vacation. He worked as a waiter, saving money, and left a note for his mom saying he was heading to California to see Mary Jane. The 2-day bus ride seemed endless, with the scenery and time of day changing outside his window. He imagined seeing Mary Jane at the final stop, his heart full of anticipation. The bus pulled up to the final stop, and Sean couldn't wait to see Mary. Through the window, he'd caught a glimpse of her bright smile and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears. They shared a special connection, having spent some of the happiest days of their lives together, often reminiscing about their carefree high school days. It was during one of their strolls that Sean first confessed his love to Mary, and to his delight, she felt the same way. As they sat on a bench, Sean suddenly felt dizzy. His vision turned dark, and he lost consciousness. Sean was rushed to the hospital, where his condition rapidly deteriorated. Mary Jane quickly contacted Sean's sister, Jennifer, who flew from Florida to California to be by his side. The doctors diagnosed Sean with a tick-borne illness that can cause severe complications, including brain inflammation, in a matter of days. A long and arduous battle for Sean's life and health ensued. After over a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation, the doctors finally managed to revive Sean. The road to recovery was tough, and the tick bite he'd suffered during their summer walk had turned out to be a serious injury. Jennifer took Sean back to Florida, where he began a long and difficult therapy. Mary Jane was left to wait anxiously, with phone calls being their only means of communication. The Eckhart family came together in the face of a series of troubles and unexpected illnesses. Donna went to great lengths to help her son Sean recover from a serious illness, carefully monitoring his diet and exercise to ensure he made a full recovery. Meanwhile, Stanley harbored feelings of resentment and jealousy towards his brother, which only grew as time passed. After his recovery, Sean regained his strength and resumed his studies in music. In 2009, he completed his studies and began making plans to return to Mary Jane, the girl he loved, and introduce her to his parents. However, his plans were not meant to be. Stanley introduced Sean to his dream girl, Samantha, a native of Florida, who quickly clicked with the two brothers. Samantha was charmed by Sean's cheerful and sociable nature, but Stanley was smitten with her and actively courted her. They went on several romantic dates, culminating in a passionate kiss. Stanley was over the moon, but Samantha had still been thinking about Sean. She sent him a message confessing her feelings and inviting him on a city walk. Sean agreed, and they spent the evening strolling along the waterfront, talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. However, Sean didn't try to win Samantha over, as he had already given his heart to someone else. Samantha, feeling down, sent a message to Stanley revealing that Sean had been seeing her behind his back and confessed his strong feelings for her. That same evening, Stanley was enraged. He stormed into his brother's room and they had a heated conversation. Initially, they spoke in hushed tones, but their words soon turned into loud shouts, followed by an eerie silence. Although their parents were home, they were accustomed to the brothers' loud arguments, so they didn't think much of it. It was Mom who first realized Sean was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the argument from the previous evening, she got Stanley's explanation that Sean had left home after their fight. 2 days into the search, the police received a chilling call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call only heard a woman's scream and a loud, piercing male moan in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally managed to record Jennifer's desperate plea for help. Jennifer continued to scream, begging for assistance and reporting that Stanley had killed Sean. She said Stanley was in the house, talking to their mom, while their dad was in shock over his dead son, who had been buried in the backyard since early Saturday morning. The police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy were met with a horrifying sight in the backyard of the house. Samuel was on his knees, his hands covered in dirt, as he frantically pulled his son's body out of the ground, screaming and desperately trying to clean the dirt off Sean's body. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood with well-manicured lawns, where the two young brothers would often wave to their neighbors, was transformed into a scene of violent tragedy. The once happy family, who had raised two sons, was now left with the traumatic memory of digging in the ground only to find one son's lifeless body and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckard was arrested on suspicion of premeditated murder. During his initial interrogation, he claimed that he had not intended to kill his brother. According to Stanley, he struck Sean on the head in a fit of anger, causing the fatal injury. After realizing Sean was dead, Stanley tied up the body and secretly buried it in the backyard to avoid disturbing his mother. Stanley's statement at the inquest seemed callous and calculating, contrary to his claim of being a loving brother. He said, "I buried him after all, that's what you do with dead people." In his defense, Stanley maintained that he covered up the incident to spare his mother the shock of learning about her son's death. He planned to rebury the body once his parents were no longer around. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation was inconsistent. At times, he broke down in tears, confessed to the crime, and expressed remorse, portraying the incident as an accident. However, he also displayed hatred towards Sean, speaking harshly and bitterly about his brother, whom he blamed for his troubles and for winning their mother's and Samantha's affections. On the same day, Stanley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, with no chance of bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean's body and presented her findings to the court. Her forensic examination revealed that Sean had bruising on his neck, both under the skin and in the form of rope marks, indicating that his neck had been constricted to make breathing difficult. The autopsy concluded that Sean's death was caused by a head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magot carefully reviewed the case. The first hearing took place on February 25, 2011, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckard, sat in the second row, weeping as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom in handcuffs. On April 9, 2013, the trial of Stanley Eckard began in Hernando Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Taddy. The defense team, led by attorney Alan Hunter, faced prosecutor Pete in the prosecution. The prosecution's main objective was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime, whereas the defense argued that the tragedy resulted from a spontaneous fight. In his closing statement, Alan Hunter appealed to the jury to consider Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime, allegedly driven by good intentions. Stanley Eckard was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, which carried a mandatory life sentence if convicted. The verdict would determine his fate, with sentencing scheduled for May 13th. Alternatively, if convicted of second-degree murder, Stanley faced up to life in prison. Throughout the trial, Stanley maintained that he never intended to kill his brother 3 years prior, before burying him in the front yard of their house. Prior to the trial, Eckard had rejected a plea deal from prosecutors, which offered to limit his prison sentence to 20 years in exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. As the clerk read the verdict, Stanley remained stone-faced, his fate now in the hands of District Judge Anthony Taddy, who had presided over the 5-day trial. Samuel and Donna, the parents of the accused, wept quietly as the jury left the courtroom. Samuel's sobs soon turned to screams as numerous relatives gathered around him and his wife, Donna. The jury had found Eckard guilty of second-degree murder, but didn't completely absolve him of guilt, as they believed that he didn't plan to kill 19-year-old Sean. The jury, consisting of 9 women and 3 men, reached this verdict after deliberating for approximately 2.5 hours. The Eckard family maintained that they believed Stanley's account of the events that unfolded in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010. They also criticized the state attorney's office for filing charges against Eckard. Later that day, Samuel Eckerd praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for doing an excellent job. The family, however, questioned the appropriateness of the sentence and subsequently filed an appeal to overturn the verdict, which was denied. Samuel Eckerd expressed his surprise at the jury's verdict, stating that he couldn't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours. He added that despite that, their faith was not shaken. One undisputed fact that emerged during the trial was that after his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Sean's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. It was Samuel Eckerd who discovered Sean's body 2 days later. Pete Magot showed the jury photos of Sean's body in a hole, highlighting the gruesome reality. He emphasized Stanley's inconsistent testimony, changing his story 6 times when questioned about his brother's death. Magot revealed Stanley sent fake messages from Sean's phone, pretending he was alive. After hours of questioning, Stanley finally admitted to killing Sean during a struggle, claiming he hid the body to protect their mother. Magot argued Stanley's manual infliction of injuries constitutes murder, citing testimony and statements about escalating tensions with Samantha Rowe. Stanley discussed revenge with his brother and friend, mentioning a method of killing, but this evidence was tenuous. Alan Lanter argued a crime requires intent, denied killing his brother, and cited the pathologist's testimony that Sean's death was likely caused by a combination of factors, including a head injury possibly sustained from a fall. Lanter reminded the jury of Donna Eckerd's testimony about Sean's severe mood swings after his illness diagnosis. She also said his death was an accident. Lanter urged jurors to focus on the circumstances leading to Sean's death, not the disturbing photos or Stanley's decision to bury him. Stanley Eckerd is not a murderer, Lanter said. The Eero parents were devastated, having lost 2 sons in one day. The brutal murder of an innocent brother is beyond comprehension. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the 3 younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids, Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned, driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Kara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Kara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Kara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Couch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Cara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Cara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Cara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Cara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Cara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Cara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totoro, who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Cara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Cara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Cara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Cara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Cara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, the Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Cara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005, after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fernandez Vivano was born on May 29, 1996 in Laguna, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. Valeria grew up with her older biological siblings, Michelangelo and Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother was a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising their children and creating a warm home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock to her. Although they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support, Valeria harbored resentment towards him. They would occasionally argue, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. After the divorce, Miguel Vivano remarried and had 2 more children, becoming Valeria's half-siblings. Despite this, Valeria, Daniela, and Michelangelo maintained warm relationships with them. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried, focusing on raising her children and later caring for her grandchildren from her older children. Valeria showed a strong-willed character, determination, and perseverance from a young age. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and demonstrated courage and a strong sense of justice, often putting others' needs before her own. Valeria's desire to help those around her, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice likely inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016 at the age of 20. The following year, she joined the Chilean police force and began working in the capital's serious crimes unit. From the start of her career, Valeria demonstrated herself to be a dedicated and passionate law enforcement officer, driven by a strong sense of justice. She was deeply committed to her job, performing her duties with diligence and always ready to respond to any situation at a moment's notice. Whether it meant leaving in the middle of the night to investigate a crime scene, pursuing suspects at personal risk, or providing emotional support to those who had lost loved ones, Valeria was always willing to go the extra mile. Her colleagues praised her as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she remained a consummate professional and trustworthy partner. Over nearly 5.5 years of service, Valeria received numerous accolades and awards, rapidly advancing in her career and earning the respect of her peers and the admiration of her superiors. A highlight of her career was representing her department in Spain, where she spent 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit, an experience that filled her with immense pride. By 2020, she had risen to the rank of assistant inspector. A 21-year-old rookie cop, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, joined the precinct where Valeria worked, fresh from the police academy. Valeria took him under her wing, becoming his mentor in his first job. A few months into their partnership, they got along fairly well. Not much is known about Lionel's upbringing, but it's believed he came from a wealthy and influential family with a high-ranking official as an uncle, which gave him a life of comfort and luxury. As a result, Lionel was self-absorbed, expecting everything to go his way. Valeria soon caught Lionel's attention, and he made several attempts to win her over, asking her out on dates, but she rejected him each time. Valeria was dedicated to her job and saw workplace romances as unprofessional. She was also strict with Lionel, viewing him as immature. Although Lionel was only 3 years younger, Valeria found his behavior childish and hoped to help him grow up. On May 29, 2021, Valeria turned 25. She celebrated her birthday at her mother's house, surrounded by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria intentionally left him out to avoid any potential awkwardness, as he had recently tried to rekindle their romance. When she talked to him about it, he only reaffirmed his feelings for her, which she wanted to keep private from their colleagues. Valeria looked upset despite the festivities. She was trying to conceal her sadness with a fake smile. The recent quarrel with her father had caused days of silence between them, and she had hoped he would put their differences aside and come to her party, giving them a chance to make up. But all he did was send a congratulatory message without even bothering to phone her. Jacqueline, Valeria's mother, noticed her daughter's distress and knew that the rift with her father was the cause of her sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she was convinced that Miguel would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would talk things through and reconcile. Tragically, Valeria and her father never got the chance to resolve their issues. 2 weeks later, she lost her life in a fatal shooting while on duty on June 13, 2021. Valeria was participating in street patrols and vehicle checks that night, searching for suspects related to a crime that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. The police had issued an alert for a white Kia Chato, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal who was likely armed and possibly accompanied by others in the car. Valeria was riding in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and immediately gave chase without waiting for backup. The officers successfully intercepted and blocked the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivano jumped out of their vehicle, guns drawn, and yelled for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands raised. Just then, a single shot rang out, and in the ensuing chaos, Valeria clutched her side and fell to the asphalt beside the police car. Reinforcements arrived simultaneously, and her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but they couldn't fully comprehend what had happened or who had fired. The criminals took advantage of the momentary confusion, sped away, and escaped the scene. Despite the swift arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stop the bleeding, Valeria's life couldn't be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, Valeria passed away on the operating table, never regaining consciousness. Valeria's family rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, but they were too late. Miguel, her dad, was overwhelmed with grief and regret, haunted by their recent petty argument. His guilt was so intense, it put his own health at risk. Valeria died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals, hailed as a hero for giving her life to ensure others' peace and safety. Local media extensively covered the story, praising her courage and selflessness. The public was shocked and captivated by the arrests, and soon the suspects were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cupin and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not released due to his age. Both had previous convictions for minor crimes. In response to the arrests, Chile's president, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement promising that those responsible would face the full extent of the law. As the investigation progressed, some facts didn't add up. Valeria's body was returned to her family after the autopsy and buried in a capital city cemetery, with hundreds attending the funeral. Her parents described the experience as a terrible nightmare. Notably, among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed more grief-stricken than anyone else. However, other colleagues reported that there had been recent tension between Valeria and Lionel, to the extent that Valeria didn't even invite him to her birthday celebration. Legal proceedings started right after the funeral against those arrested the next day. Initially, everyone thought the guilty ones were caught and proving it would be easy. But it soon became clear the investigation was flawed, with key details missed and evidence ignored. A month and a half after the officer's death, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged role in the incident. Valeria's parents were called to the prosecutor's office, expecting new evidence. Instead, they were devastated to learn from prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. Subsequent investigations showed that the fatal shot was fired from a service weapon held by one of Valeria's co-workers. A same-day ballistics test confirmed this, but the results were tampered with, and the bullet's characteristics, shape, caliber, and weight were incorrectly recorded in the evidence locker. Furthermore, the bullet had passed through Valeria's body, but it wasn't extracted. Instead, it was reported to have been extracted, and the entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were switched. The shot was fired into her back, not her abdomen. Furthermore, the detainees who were on trial, claiming to have confessed to their involvement and were on the verge of imprisonment, began filing complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and threats, and the pistol they had with them that evening was not even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the prior crime that prompted the interception plan that fateful night remained unconfirmed. A surprising twist emerged in the public's perception of Vivano, transforming her from a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to an innocent victim betrayed by her own colleagues. As a result, the main suspect shifted to Felipe Gilardo Ara, who was driving the police car, and Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, Vivano's partner, who was seated in the back. Both were immediately suspended from duty. On August 5th, it was discovered that the fatal bullet came from a police-issued weapon. A document surfaced showing examination results that implicated Lionel as the prime suspect, as he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands, a crucial finding that had been mysteriously left out of previous reports. Additionally, several other vital documents, including ballistics examination reports and the pathologist's conclusions, were improperly stored in an archive box that had not been thoroughly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was an accident, an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to conceal crucial evidence. The police officers involved in the operation to catch the criminals surprisingly became suspects in the murder of their fellow officer. Along with the suspects already arrested, they participated in a reenactment of the events of that night to clarify what had happened. In the reenactment, Philippe, who was driving, explained that he could only see Valeria, who was sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, when she got out of the car. Lionel, who was sitting behind them, also exited the vehicle, but Philippe couldn't see what he was doing. According to Philippe, Valeria took just a few steps before a shot was fired, causing her to fall to the ground. At that point, Lionel rushed to help the injured woman and provide first aid to try to save her life. Lionel gave a different account of what happened, saying that he and his partner Valeria got out of the patrol car at almost the same time, but she rushed forward immediately after the shot was fired. He denied shooting his colleague, Valeria, and claimed that Philippe, the driver, should have seen him trying to help Valeria and confirmed this. According to Lionel, he was the first to assist Valeria and tried to stop her bleeding to prevent her from dying. The investigation managed to reconstruct the events, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They found that Canales was behind his partner when the shot was fired, which corresponded with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, he was the only one with traces of gunshot residue on his hands. Lionel was arrested as prime suspect after secret reports and test results were released, while other detainees were freed on condition they stay local, lacking evidence to implicate them. But the officers' motives remained unclear. The prevailing theory is that a tragic accident occurred when an inexperienced young officer unintentionally fired his weapon while standing behind his partner. In a state of panic, he attempted to assist her. Later, when submitting his service weapon, he falsely claimed not to have fired it. However, the truth eventually came to light, exposing that influential relatives of the young officer exploited their power, wealth, and connections to conceal the incident, leading to fabricated reports, missing documents, contradictory evidence, and coerced testimony from detained individuals. Despite Canale's arrest, suspicions about Philippe's involvement persisted. Philippe was also armed with the same service weapons, was present at the scene, and could have accidentally fired the fatal shot. Additionally, Philippe had a history of using his weapon unjustifiably during an arrest, although no one was harmed on that occasion. The defense team, hired by Lionel's relatives, presented a theory that Philippe might have accidentally shot his colleague due to the identical service weapons, which could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Philippe's own testimony was inconsistent, and he claimed he couldn't accurately describe the events that took place. Despite this, the lack of gunpowder residue on the driver's hands suggested his innocence. Philippe's explanation that the residue came from when he was compressing the victim's wound was not believable, given that Valeria's blood stains remained on his hands. The investigation was widely criticized, and the victim's parents were left feeling desperate, leading to public outrage and a loss of trust in law enforcement. Following further investigation, Lionel remained the sole suspect. Lionel was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, in a surprise move, the Supreme Court later overturned the sentence, reducing his imprisonment to just 540 days. Valeria's family is now planning to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Marta del Castillo. Marta del Castillo was born on June 19, 1991, in Seville, Spain, to parents Eva Casanova and Antonio del Castillo. At the age of 17, Marta was a normal high school student like everyone else, then her life changed completely. On January 24, 2009, Marta was in the middle of a conversation with her best friend, Silvia Fernandez. She abruptly ended the conversation, explaining that she had to leave quickly because her boyfriend, Miguel Carcano, was waiting for her downstairs. Marta told Silvia that she needed to talk to Miguel to clear up some issues in their relationship and promised to fill her in on everything when she returned. Marta ran into her father in the hallway and he advised her against getting on Miguel's motorcycle. In response, Marta just gave her father a light kiss on the cheek. She left her home at 5:30 p.m., and as the hours passed and she failed to return, her family started to worry. Marta's mother reached out to several people, and they all gave the same answer. Marta was probably with Miguel, who would likely know where she was. However, when they tried to contact Miguel, he didn't answer their calls. As a result, Marta's father decided to visit Miguel's house. Despite ringing the doorbell multiple times, no one answered the door. They eventually got in touch with Samuel Benitez, a close friend of Miguel's who claimed to have seen Marta that night. According to Samuel, Miguel dropped Marta off at his house at midnight, which was plausible considering it was only 11:45. Marta's family became more worried, and at 2 a.m. that morning, they reported her missing to the police. At that point, they had no idea that Marta's disappearance would become one of the most highly publicized cases in the country's history. 4 hours after Marta's disappearance was reported, the police identified Miguel Carcano, Marta's boyfriend, as a suspect. Despite this, a third report was filed at 1:30 p.m. But the authorities failed to take immediate action. The family grew increasingly frustrated with the delay. However, 17 hours after the initial request for help, the police initiated a search for Marta. As time went by, Marta's family took matters into their own hands and started collecting statements from Marta's relatives and friends. They also organized a press conference on January 27, 2009, and initiated a campaign to find her. A large protest took place in Seville the day after Marta's disappearance, with 2,000 people demanding her safe return under the slogan, "We are all Marta." A second demonstration on February 7 drew around 3,000 people, and the case received widespread media attention. After 21 days of searching, the police finally found Miguel Carcano on February 13th. The 20-year-old confessed to Marta's murder and revealed that he had dumped her body into the Guave River near his apartment. However, he claimed he did not act alone and implicated Samuel Benitez as an accomplice in disposing of the body. Samuel accepted responsibility for his role in the crime. Further investigation led to the identification of additional accomplices, including Francisco Javier Garcia Marin, aka El Cuco, a troubled minor, Francisco Delgado, Carcano's brother, and Maria Garcia, Francisco Delgado's girlfriend. All 5 suspects were arrested and interrogated, but their statements were inconsistent. Meanwhile, a thorough search for Marta's body in the river began. On February 16th, Miguel repeated his statement to a judge, claiming he had only admitted to the crime due to police pressure and was not involved in Marta's murder. Miguel Carcano changed his testimony on March 18th, claiming that he and El Cuco had violated Marta with a knife before strangling her. He then took Marta's body to Delgado's house and disposed of it in a garbage container. However, Marta's father accused Delgado's girlfriend, Maria Garcia, and theorized that Marta's body may have been destroyed, as Maria Garcia's father worked at a biological waste crematorium. Despite this theory gaining media attention, the police continued searching for Marta's body. On November 16, 2009, El Cuco was moved to a supervised apartment because he had exceeded the maximum time allowed for confinement. He was awaiting trial, which took place in February 2011. El Cuco was acquitted of abuse and murder charges due to insufficient evidence, but was sentenced to 2 years and 11 months in a juvenile detention center for covering up for Miguel. The trial for the 4 defendants Miguel, Samuel, Delgado, Maria Garcia involved in the case began on October 17, 2011. During the trial, Miguel Carcano admitted to hitting Marta with an ashtray during a heated argument, which led to her death. He also revealed that his previous statements about abusing Marta were false. The investigation revealed inconsistencies in the stories told by Delgado, Maria Garcia, and Samuel. They claimed to have no knowledge of Marta's whereabouts after her death. They alleged that Miguel fabricated the entire story to reduce his guilt. However, forensic analysis uncovered incriminating evidence. On November 22, 2011, the forensic police discovered traces of Marta's blood on Miguel's jacket. A mix of Miguel DNA and Maria Garcia's DNA was also found on a roll of fabric tape. Additionally, a DNA match from Delgado and Maria Garcia was detected on an extension cable, believed to have been used to strangle Marta. This was surprising, given the accused had consistently maintained they had only been at the crime scene early in the morning and had no knowledge of the incident. When confronted with the new evidence, Maria Garcia was accused of violating Marta's body in attempting to cover up the crime. A detailed analysis of the crime scene revealed up to 5 fingerprints on 3 alcohol bottles, with 1 belonging to El Cuco. As the investigation drew to a close, the 4 suspects were under intense scrutiny from the public. Their trials were heavily guarded by the police, and the prosecution presented a substantial case against Miguel, Samuel, Delgado, and Maria Garcia. The trial involved 90 witnesses, including national police officers and experts. The prosecution also presented 30,000 pH monitorings, crime scene photographs, DNA evidence, and other items found at the house on Leon 13. The trial sparked a massive public outcry, drawing large crowds that pushed against the police barrier. The public requested to view Marta's body and also wanted to catch a glimpse of Miguel, the accused. Despite Delgado and Maria Garcia attempting to conceal themselves with hats and sunglasses, however, they were still unable to escape the crowd's attention. A woman approached them, shouting insults, while others tried to remove their sunglasses and pushed them forward, forcing them to reveal their faces to the surrounding crowd. During the trial, El Cuco's mother gave an interview with her face covered, insisting on her son's innocence and stating that neither she nor El Cuco had any knowledge about Marta's body. Despite being labeled a liar by journalists, she received €10,000 for the interview. A key witness then came forward, a taxi driver who had given Delgado a ride on the night of the crime. The driver explained that he had been extra cautious with his passengers, as a colleague had been murdered recently. He recalled picking up a bald, bearded man matching Delgado's description, who had a plastic bag and stared at him intently. The driver stated that he dropped Delgado off on Leon's 13th Street, exactly where the crime took place, and charged him €8 for the ride. However, Delgado's defense lawyer questioned the driver's statement, pointing out that the fare for the 2-kilometer ride should have been €5, not €8, which cast doubt on the driver's testimony. Marta's parents took the stand and described the immense pain they were experiencing due to the situation. They had to quit their jobs, start taking psychiatric medication, and even develop depression. Their other 2 daughters, Marta's sisters, were also going through a terrible time. The jury's verdict in January 2012 did not bring the family the satisfaction they were hoping for. Miguel was the only person responsible for Marta's murder and was sentenced to 21 years and 3 months in prison. Additionally, he was banned from living in the city where Marta's family resides for the next 30 years. He to pay part of the trial costs and compensate Marta's parents with €280,000 for the moral damage caused by her murder and disappearance. Each of her sisters was also awarded €30,000. In contrast, Delgado and Samuel were released due to lack of evidence placing them at the crime scene at the time of the murder. However, the following year, they demanded that Marta's family pay for the trial costs, adding to the family's distress. Marta's father expressed his intention to seek justice beyond Spain's borders, as he believed the country's system was outdated. He even considered taking Marta's case to Strasbourg, home to the European Parliament and the European Court of Human Rights. In December 2011, Marta's mother wrote a heartfelt letter to Miguel, who was in prison at the time. She asks him to return Marta's body so they can end the long suffering they have endured. She longed to give Marta a proper burial, where she could visit her, bring flowers, and talk to her. Unfortunately, the letter went unanswered. On January 24, 2012, 3 years after Marta's disappearance, demonstrations took place in various Spanish cities and towns, demanding justice for the young girl. As a result, Miguel faced threats from fellow inmates and attempted to take his own life. He was then transferred to a specialized therapy unit where he had limited contact with the outside world, including no visitors or phone calls. During his imprisonment, Miguel created multiple versions of the crime, with as many as 7 different accounts. This led to several lawyers withdrawing from his case due to inconsistencies. In his latest testimony, presented in 2013, he implicated someone close to him as the perpetrator of the crime. Miguel described an argument between him and his brother, Delgado, over the mortgage for their house at Leon 13. The dispute began when Miguel sent a letter to the family stating that he no longer wanted to cover for Delgado. Miguel stated that a disagreement over a fraudulent loan led to a physical confrontation. The situation became violent and Delgado allegedly threatened his younger brother with a weapon. When Marta intervened, she was fatally struck with the butt of Delgado's gun. After the incident, Delgado made a phone call, but the recipient and the content of the conversation are unknown. Delgado then left the house, leaving Marta's lifeless body behind. El Cuco arrived, and Delgado asked for his help in disposing of the body. They used a wheelchair to transport the body to the Mahala farm in Moneda, where they buried Marta. At first, Marta's parents believed Miguel's story and were grateful to him for telling the truth. They requested that the investigation be reopened, this time focusing on Delgado. However, the prosecution and the judge did not find Marta's statements credible. Marta's father visited Miguel in prison, asking for his cooperation in finding Marta's body. In exchange for Miguel's help, Marta's father offered him a deal. Upon his release from prison, he would give Miguel the house located at Lawn 13, which he had previously purchased. The search for Marta's body became one of the most expensive in the country's history, involving extensive land and sea searches. It seemed impossible for Miguel, Samuel, and another person to transport Marta's body on a motorcycle without incident. During the reenactment, the body fell off the moment the engine started. After Miguel claimed that the body was thrown into a trash bin, the search shifted to the local landfill, which receives all the area's waste. In order to find any relevant clues, the search team estimated that they would need to remove approximately 40,000 tons of waste from the landfill due to the large amount of time that had passed since Marta's disappearance and the massive amount of waste at the landfill. The search for Marta's body lasted 32 days but was unsuccessful. Miguel, the accused, gave investigators 4 different locations where evidence might be found, leading to multiple new searches. However, the searches were hindered by a lack of funds, and at one point, the then Interior Minister Alfredo Perez had to pause the search due to financial constraints. In April 2013, Miguel pointed to Delgado as the real murderer and provided another location where Marta's body could be found, this time near the city of Lake, Canada. Despite having lost credibility due to his previous false versions, a new search was conducted. Miguel went with the police to the area and gave them a general idea of where he claimed to have buried Marta's body in 2009, along with Delgado. The police excavated the soil of 6 farms, focusing on areas with recent earth movements. A total area of 10,000 square meters was scanned, but unfortunately, nothing was found. All the searches were unsuccessful, and at the request of Marta's parents. The search was halted until 2015. The public ministry requested that the defendants compensate the Ministry of the Interior for the costs incurred during the search, amounting to $66,329. In a new development, an individual named Oscar, who claimed to be a criminal, approached El Cuco's, Rosalia mother, and pretended to seek a confession. However, his actual intention was to infiltrate and secretly gather information. Over time, Oscar and Rosalia developed a close relationship, meeting every 2 or 3 days and speaking daily on the phone. Rosalia trusted Oscar enough to give him the keys to her house, and they shared secrets and took long walks on the beach together. He gained her trust and affection. Oscar even convinced Rosalia that they would leave the country together once her son's, El Cuco situation was resolved. Meanwhile, Oscar secretly recorded 600 hours of conversations between Rosalia and those around her over a period of 2.5 years. In October 2011, El Cuco was granted temporary release from the juvenile center, where he was being held for covering up for Miguel. During one conversation, Oscar asked El Cuco if he thought the police were following him. El Cuco replied that were, and that the police were trying to find out where they had hidden Marta. This statement incriminated El Cuco and revealed his involvement in Marta's disappearance. Realizing his mistake, El Cuco quickly tried to retract his statement, claiming he had done nothing wrong. Oscar played along as if he hadn't noticed. However, in other recordings, El Cuco made fun of the police's efforts to find the body, and Rosalia criticized the investigators for not examining her phone records closely. Although Oscar worked diligently to record conversations, the 600 hours of recorded material was not presented as evidence in court. It wasn't until 13 years after Marta's disappearance, in 2022, that the recordings led to results. On May 26, 2022, a large crowd of mostly neighbors from Marta's family gathered outside the courthouse to demonstrate their support for a new trial. Rosalia and El Cuco arrived at the courthouse, protected by police. El Cuco was fully covered, wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, gloves, and a mask. Rosalia wore sunglasses, a mask, and a headscarf. In 2011, El Cuco claimed he wasn't at the scene of the crime on Lyon 13th Street. El Cuco said he had gone home around 11:30 p.m. with friends and met his mother's partner, Oscar, who was taking out the trash. Oscar then went upstairs to his apartment and stayed there for the rest of the night. Rosalia claimed she had gone out for drinks with Oscar around 11:30 p.m. and returned home around 1:30 a.m. on January 25th, finding her son asleep. El Cuco admitted that on January 24th, Miguel contacted him for assistance after killing Marta. Miguel requested his help in burying Marta's body, along with Samuel. They used Rosalia's vehicle to travel to Lyon 13, where Delgado is also there. During this time, Rosalia, El Cuco's mother, stayed at a bar until 4:30 in the morning. Upon returning home, she found her son missing. In the end, El Cuco and Rosalia were charged with perjury for hindering prosecution. As a result, El Cuco and Rosalia were sentenced to 2.5 years in prison on June 9, 2022. The judge also imposed a fine of €1,144 on each of them, as well as ordering them to pay €30,000 in civil liability to Marta's parents. Despite the sentencing and fines, Marta's parents were more concerned with finding their daughter's body than seeking monetary compensation. In the same year, the investigative judge allowed an expert to access the mobile phones of Miguel and Marta. Notably, Miguel gave his consent for his phone to be examined, believing it would reveal evidence pointing to Delgado as the actual perpetrator. The primary objective of the investigation was to locate Marta's body, which remained missing. 13 years after Marta's murder, the civil court decided to close the investigation into the search for her body in November 2022. The court declared the investigation period had expired because no new significant evidence had been found. Marta's parents eventually accepted that Miguel would never disclose the location of their daughter's body. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Soni Millbrook. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She is the daughter of Cristie Millbrook Bennett and grew up in a large family with many siblings, having 2 sisters and 3 brothers. This warm and close-knit environment helped her build a special relationship with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, when she was 17 years old and in the 11th grade, she met a man named Lakeith Moody, who was older than her. She soon began a relationship with him. However, the relationship was not a happy one, as Lakeith was abusive and violent, leaving visible injuries on Soni's body. Despite this, they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Soni's mother discovered a bruise on Soni's chest. When her mother asked her about it, Soni cried and confessed that Lakeith had caused the injury. A friend of Soni's also witnessed the injury, but Soni refused to report Lakeith's behavior to the police. Lakeith often controlled Soni and tried to isolate her from her friends and family. That same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the management informed her of an incident at her apartment. When she arrived, she found a chaotic scene: damaged furniture, missing clothes, a destroyed television, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including under the stairs. Strangely, the mirror had the words, "Kiki loves you," with Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. Lakeith's behavior made Soni's relatives even more concerned. On October 31, 2000, Soni and her cousin, Pamela, went to a bar called The Mirage with Lakeith. While at the bar, Lakeith became aggressive towards Soni by slapping her and throwing a drink in her face. After the incident, Soni and Pamela left the bar and got into their car. According to Pamela, Soni was shaken and frightened by Lakeith's actions. Sony asked Pamela to take her home immediately because she was afraid that Lakeith would come after them. When Sony got home, she locked the door securely. An hour later, Lakeith came to the house, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela had to threaten to call the police to make Lakeith leave. Once Sony calmed down, her cousin decided to leave her alone. However, that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Sony had been hospitalized. Lakeith had forced his way into the house, and when Sony tried to end the relationship, he attacked her. He tore off Sony's clothes and hit her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She suffered bruises all over her body, loose teeth, and even lost consciousness because Lakeith choked her until she passed out. Lakeith later accidentally discovered that Sony was on birth control pills, and he attacked her again. The next morning, Sony called Pamela and asked her cousin to take her to the hospital because of serious health problems. In late 2008, Sony, then 27, worked at a Christian institute. She was considered a reliable and punctual employee. Therefore, when she took time off or missed work, it was usually due to important reasons. Once, she called her supervisor to report that she could not come to work because her face was badly bruised, and she did not want the children to see it. After she asked for a day off, Director Leslie approved it. However, when Sony returned a few days later, the bruises were so obvious that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses while working at the academy. Lakeith's violence not only affected Sony and their children but also caused concern in the community. In April 2008, Lakeith was found sitting in an SUV with a gun in his hand, despite being previously prohibited from owning a gun due to a criminal record. Furthermore, he had previously served 2 years in prison for burglary and 3 years in prison for drug possession with intent to distribute. Sony tried to avoid her boyfriend, but it was almost impossible. The situation came to a head on October 6, 2008. At that time, Sony did not arrive at the academy by 5 p.m. Her sister received a text message from Sony saying that Lakeith was holding her hostage in his home and had been beating her all day. Sony also provided her home address. Sony's sister called the police. 2 officers went to Sony's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer since it was locked from the inside. They then called the security department to unlock the door. When the police entered the house, they saw Sony's boyfriend jumping out of the back window of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, crying and unable to speak because of her grief. Her 4 children were also present, making for a very heartbreaking scene. Sony's face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. Sony and Lakeith began arguing, and he refused to let her leave the house. She told the police that Lakeith would not let her or the children near the window. She also said that Lakeith injured one of their children by grabbing the child and preventing her from taking the child to the hospital. Sony said that her boyfriend had been both physically and verbally abusive. During one altercation, he tied a baby blanket around her neck and choked her until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to choke her again and said he would kill her if the police did not let him go. The police searched the area but did not find Lakeith. Sony then left the house with the children in her car. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any contact with him. However, she missed the hearing, and the protective order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he began arguing with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly turned violent as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She tried to break free and ran out of the apartment while Lakeith screamed and threatened to kill her. Lakeith did not catch Sony but instead kidnapped their youngest child, an infant, and drove away at high speed. A police patrol alerted to the domestic disturbance arrived as Lakeith was running away. The officers attempted to stop him, but he escaped. In early 2010, Soni, 28, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. She had to stay home to care for her fifth child, who was 9 weeks old, because of poor health. In January, Soni and the children moved into the Budget Lodge in Memphis. However, on the first day Soni moved in, she and Lakeith's arguments became so loud that motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Soni and Lakeith could not maintain a peaceful relationship. They argued constantly, disturbing neighbors and management with the noise. On January 22nd, a hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a very agitated state. He arrived at a high rate of speed in Soni's car and then began yelling at her as she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In his anger, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard arrived and told Lakeith not to make any noise or throw things in the hotel. Lakeith was instructed to settle the argument in his room. However, Lakeith told the security guard that he did not need to worry about it. Lakeith then locked his car and accompanied the security guard to an unoccupied room on the third floor. The security guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had. Surprisingly, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms, even though he was not registered as a guest. The next day, Lakeith and Soni moved into room 222 with their children. However, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave that evening. Although Lakeith left as requested, he soon returned. The arguments between Soni and Lakeith continued for several more days until the guard asked Lakeith to leave the hotel for good. As Lakeith left, the front desk clerk tried to calm him down. The guard also warned Lakeith not to come back that night. Lakeith got into her car and drove away. Some time later, Soni spoke to Pamela and confided that she was having problems in her life. She was staying at the motel and wanted to talk to Pamela about something important. Soni said that she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Soni took the younger children to daycare and the older children to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Soni's door and spoke to her through the window to inform her that they needed to pay the rent or they would have to leave. The manager returned several times that day. On a visit around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to pick up the money. On January 27th, Soni did not pick up her older daughter on time. So the school secretary called the child's grandmother, Christine, to ask her to come pick up the girl. When Christine tried to contact Soni, she received no response. At around 6 p.m., she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Concerned that she could not reach Soni, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school to find out what was wrong. They contacted the police and reported the incident at approximately 10:30 p.m. Later, on January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222 and began taking inventory of the items that Soni and Lakeith had left behind. The room was filled with clothing in a large trash bag, which was then taken to a storage area. After the room was cleaned, it was ready for new guests. On January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into the room. They quickly noticed a foul odor and attempted to block it with incense, but were unable to eliminate it completely. They also discovered that previous tenants had attempted the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. Because the smell was so strong that they reported it. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Soni's whereabouts, as that was where she was last seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was arrested on February 2nd, around 7 p.m., while inside Soni's car at a shopping center. He was held for 48 hours on a charge of car theft. During questioning about Soni's disappearance, Lakeith said he last saw her on January 26. He explained they had met in the hotel parking lot that morning after Soni had dropped off her children at school. They went into the room, had sex, and then returned outside. Lakeith then took Soni's car keys and left the hotel. He claimed Soni planned to use her welfare and student loan money to buy a new car, so he wasn't worried about keeping her car. Lakeith also said he had been living in the car since January 26. However, investigators discovered that Lakeith had actually been staying at a different hotel. Additionally, given the snowy weather during that time, it was unlikely that he had spent the night in the car. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Soni's name on it and several recent purchase receipts inside the car. That same day, police also searched the clothes stored at the hotel for DNA or other evidence, but found nothing. Due to the lack of evidence linking Lakeith to Soni's disappearance, he was released. Soni's cousin and her mother had to undertake the painful task of going to the hotel where Soni was staying to collect her belongings. At that time, Soni's cousin had a bad feeling but did not find any evidence. On February 4th, the police went to Soni's cousin's house and found a DVD player in Soni's wallet. Soni's cousin said they had received the items from Moody. According to the cousin, Lakeith borrowed the DVD player on January 24th under the pretext of watching a movie and drove a red car that day. When he saw Lakeith again a few days later, the cousin asked why Lakeith did not pick up the children on January 27th. But Lakeith evaded the question. When the cousin asked about Soni's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet behind and left. Around that time, guests James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved out of room 222 because of the persistent odor. Since there were no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Later guests in room 222 also complained of a foul odor, despite the room being cleaned several times and the carpets being cleaned in early February. The odor persisted, only easing slightly over several days. On February 4th, homicide detectives arrived at the hotel to investigate. By this time, room 222 had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. As a result, the detectives were unable to enter the room to collect evidence. Instead, they asked hotel staff if they had noticed anything unusual. All staff responded that nothing was unusual. Then, on February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times. During one of the changes, they spent the night in room 222. While there, they informed management that the room still smelled unpleasant. To address this issue, in March, the hotel performed a more thorough cleaning of room 222. The staff cleaned the carpet, bedding, shower curtains, and window blinds. However, the results were shocking. The odor not only remained but became even more intense. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard. During the conversation, they recalled that the previous tenant, Soni, had disappeared at the end of January. The security guard recalled the events that occurred at that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for traces of blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men entered the room where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the bed frame. The bottom of the bed frame had a cover. When they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large gap where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the sturdy edges of the bed frame, they saw the unthinkable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame was found to have many marks on it, and there were 2 pieces of broken wood near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the legs of the body. The victim was wearing a shirt but nothing below the waist. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended behind the back. The medical examiner concluded that it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes of sustained pressure to cause death. In order to find the killer, the police collected items from between the victim's legs for analysis. The victim's shirt had an unidentified fingerprint. In addition, the scarf and the cloth bag did not belong to the victim. DNA samples that matched Sony's genetic profile, as well as that of a woman, were discovered. More remarkably, male DNA was also found on the cable, which led to the hypothesis that Sony had died at the time she was reported missing. The coaxial cable used in the case may have come from a DVD player that Lakeith borrowed from her cousin. Lakeith had been arrested by police for illegal possession of a weapon, and he was also the last person seen with Sony alive, making him a suspect in the case. He was in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the Mason detention facility. On March 18th, authorities launched an investigation into why the case unfolded in such a strange way. The chief of police said the victim's family deserved an explanation and acknowledged that the circumstances of the case were unprecedented, making it a shocking case of domestic violence. He also regretted that the room where Sony died had been cleaned and rented out multiple times, making it difficult for police to collect evidence. However, this explanation was met with skepticism. One of the first tenants, Rhonda, said the police should have been allowed into the room when James and Rhonda visited in January and would have found Sony sooner if they had noticed the smell of a decomposing body. Rhonda believes the police were slow in finding Sony. Following the loss, Sony's family held a funeral for her on March 24th. Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister on April 1st. They are currently trying to gain legal custody of the children. Sony's sister said that although the children were the primary victims, everyone in the family's lives was turned upside down by the loss. She pledged to take care of Sony's children, making sure they had enough food, clothes, and toys, and to keep them together as a family. She also said Sony had benefited from a social program, and she would continue to care for the children as her sister had. The card had been loaded with money before Sony went missing because she received an income tax refund. Police tracked the card's activity and found that it was in Lakeith's possession. During the surveillance, they noticed that the card was used on February 1st at a convenience store Sony usually visited to withdraw cash using her electronic welfare transfer card. Notably, this occurred 4 days after Sony went missing. Officers went to the store and requested the owner to show them the footage from their 16 security cameras. Through the footage, they observed that on the morning of February 1st, at 11:38 a.m., a man dressed in yellow conducted a transaction at the store. He used a Sony card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and purchased a cigar. After making these purchases, he returned to a car driven by someone else. With all the evidence against him, Lakeith's trial began in the first week of February 2014, more than 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel involved in the crime had closed. Lakeith did not admit his guilt. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the case as the tragic end of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, Lakeith's defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to establish his client's guilt. He pointed out that there were no witnesses or physical evidence to prove Lakeith's crime. The attorney also noted that the police found fingerprints on the victim's bed frame, but those fingerprints did not match Lakeith's. This suggests that someone else may have been involved in the crime. Additionally, the attorney argued that there was reason to suspect that the victim had had relationships with several other men over the years. He also emphasized that his client had never been convicted of domestic violence against the victim. Furthermore, he revealed something that the public did not know. Sony moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's home due to a rat infestation. On February 6, video footage showing Lakeith using a Sony prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented to the court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor throughout the transaction demonstrated his innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold and ruthless man with no regard for the crimes he was accused of committing. On February 7, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On February 10, he appealed the conviction, arguing that the court had erred in considering his past acts of domestic violence and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the convictions, affirming the decision.